Controlling the display of numeric information is one of the most important things that many Excel users need. This worksheet, like many an Excel worksheet, is loaded with numbers. Look at the information in columns E and F. We've got salaries here, and nothing wrong with those entries really. But it's pretty much of a convention that as soon as we have 4 digits in numbers, we'd like to see commas or some way to read them more easily. Don't overlook the idea that selecting the entire column often makes sense. This will not use up any additional memory. It doesn't make the file any larger. Why not select both of these columns, drag across here? The fastest way to change the display of these numbers in a sensible way might be on the Home tab in the number group, choose $sign. And by the way, you may have noticed as I slid over that $sign, the pop-up Accounting Number Format. In older versions of Excel, before 2007, frequently you would look at this $sign would say currency. Counting number format, not in everybody's vocabulary. Now, would that be a good choice here? And I'm editorializing a bit here. For a lot of us, this is too many $signs. We see too many in every single case here. Let's use comma instead. Now, this is not the opposite. The name doesn't quite ring true. We're not sure what it means if we haven't used it. What does comma do? Essentially the same thing, but without the $signs. Unlike other kinds of formatting buttons, for example, bold, italic, underlining, the $sign is not truly an on-off or a toggle button. Click $sign, we see them, click $sign again, nothing happens. So even though these two are not the opposite, for many people, it becomes the two most important formatting buttons when it comes to numerical information. In either case, and depending upon the circumstances, it's going to make sense not to show the decimals, perhaps decrease the decimals. You're likely to want to see either 0 or 2 decimals. And of course, these buttons here. If this were scientific data, you could easily imagine situations where we might want to show more decimals. We can easily make these adjustments here. And as always, formatting simply changes appearances. We are not changing values here. What if the needs are greater than this? What if some of the data we have doesn't quite fit, or perhaps we're surprised with some of the choices here? In columns J, K, and L, we've got numerical information, financial information as well, perhaps. Let's drag across columns J, K, and L. $sign might be a choice, might not be. But what I wanted to bring out here is the idea that negatives, of course, will appear from time to time in data. Is that the way you would like to see them display, the way we're seeing them in column L? That is the standard accounting notation style. If we choose comma, watch the difference. We'll still see the parentheses. Not everybody understands or uses parentheses this way, and so what we need to be exploring here is the idea that sometimes the buttons that we see in this number group on the Home tab are not sufficient for all of our needs. And you'll notice in the lower right-hand corner an arrow. You'll also see this, by the way, on the Alignment tab, on the Font tab, and when other tabs in the ribbon are active from time to time, you won't see any on the Formulas tab, for example. You will see them on the Page Layout tab. But going back to the Home tab, this dialog box launcher, as it's called, activates a dialog box, the Format Cells dialog box. Now, this is one way to activate it. We'll show you a few more. This is very familiar to longtime users of Excel, and many times it takes us behind the scenes. It gives us more choices. For those choices perhaps that are not so obvious. Now, it could be that the choice you're looking for is something you really are going to need often. So let's not minimize the use of this. And as we look at this, what might we choose here? Here's another choice called currency. Now notice when I click on currency, you'll see the different choices here. If you prefer the negatives to have a leading minus, you might choose this option here. I'll click OK. We're not dealing with the decimals just yet, but you see what happened there. It actually shifted the data to the right. Now I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo so you can see that again. And now press Ctrl Y to redo. This is the difference. Accounting notation puts in parentheses and it needs that extra half space to the right. Notice in row 5 here, this data, this 34,469, has that half space out to the right so the decimals line up properly. So it's a decision you have to make as to which kind of format works best for you. Again, clicking column out just for the moment, choosing comma, that's the choice we see, the negatives in parentheses. If that's not what you want, One choice could be click that dialog box launcher and then choose currency and then choose a different negative. Now you could choose red, of course, or red in parentheses. I'm just, for contrast, I'm choosing the leading minuses here, and we see how that plays out. Now, ideally, you should be consistent here, and so if we were doing this, perhaps we would again go to that same location. Instead of clicking the dialog box launcher, there are two shortcuts that you should be aware of. Control-1 activates the Format Cells dialog box that we just saw. You see that here. And by the way, the tab that will be active is the one that you use when you most recently used this particular dialog box. If you had just been making font changes, had we come here, we'd see some font choices instead. But for the moment, we're interested in numerical choices here. Notice also there's another choice called number. And this doesn't give us any options to put in currency symbols. Currency, of course, does allow the $ here and other kinds of symbols that might be appropriate to your needs as well. So in a certain sense, you could say if you're dealing with numerical information, you might want to explore number, currency, and accounting. And as we'll see a bit later too, there are some keystroke shortcuts associated with these that will make them a bit faster. So you have to make a decision here and there about what works best for you. I frequently steer people back to the idea that try and use $ and comma and be happy with it, and then you won't have to go behind the scenes and explore some of the other options. But here's another aspect to this that you wouldn't see necessarily. And you wouldn't probably see it in a column like this, but I'm going to on purpose take both of these columns and make them substantially wider. Sometimes with financial reports, you'll see large numbers and smaller numbers within the same column. And look at the $ here. They're off on the left-hand side. Now that may not be what you want, and so what you could choose here, and you wouldn't do this instinctively, but once again, pressing either Control-1 or the dialog box launcher, activate Format Cells again, and this time possibly choose currency. Click OK, watch the $signs. So sometimes that's meaningful too. So we see the variations with the various number choices that we see here. Once again, recapping. For fast, easy changes, $ or comma as needed, you decide on the display of decimals, decrease, increase as needed. If you have negatives, think about whether the comma approach works because it does put in parentheses. If not, either right-click, choose Format Cells, or press Control-1, or use that dialog box launcher, and change these to a display that suits your needs best. We can quickly and easily format numbers of this nature by using the buttons in the number group on the Home tab, $, comma, and where necessary, increase and decrease decimals. Excel has quite a few different keystroke shortcuts that are going to help you speed along the process of formatting numbers. In column B, for example, we have sales, times of day, 24-hour type times here. Nothing really wrong with that. But if you would like to see AM, PM, there's a keystroke shortcut, and only one, for arranging the display of time, and it's Control-Shift-@. Perhaps you might think I'll meet you at 3 o'clock. Maybe that's how you'll remember the at symbol, Control-Shift-@. And that's on the same key as the number 2 is. Over in columns M and N, you'll notice that some of these shortcuts we'll be using here are displayed here, Control-Shift-@. Some books, by the way, will display that as a shortcut. They might use the term Control-@. Of course, you'd have to use the Shift key to get to it. So however you think of it, it is there on this key that has these two symbols on it. And the change in column B is we now see AM, PM. For some people, they're more comfortable in understanding this display than the 24-hour type. Nothing truly wrong with column C, but the one keystroke shortcut associated with dates is Control-Shift-#. Now, perhaps that # might remind you of a calendar grid. That never occurred to me once until I saw it in a book, but Control-Shift# does display the month as 3 letters, and for some people that eliminates that momentary doubt when they're looking at a date as to which month it is. Now, column D is just pure numbers, and nothing wrong with the display there either, although it's sort of a convention that when numbers reach 4 digits, it would be appropriate possibly to have commas here. Many of you know that the comma button in the number group on the Home tab Certainly gets the job done pretty fast. Now it does introduce decimals, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to press Control Z, and by the way, before I do, notice that these numbers here do have a half space behind them, and that indicates that if the values were negative, they would be in parentheses. And for the moment here, I'm going to press Control Z to undo. The keystroke shortcut that's closely associated with this, but slightly different in the way that it handles negatives and in the display here, is Control Shift exclamation point, and it's referred to as number format. So the difference here between this and watch the display difference now when I press the comma button. Watch that half space on the right. You see what's happening. I'm going to press Control Z and put a minus in front of this. And again, re-emphasizing what we're doing here, Control Shift exclamation point will keep the display the same. There we go. And watch the comma button, watch the difference. So here and there, even though that's not synonymous, that Control Shift exclamation point isn't synonymous with comma, they're very close. And you might consider that as part of your repertoire of shortcuts here. Columns E and F, many people use the $ button. I certainly do a lot. It does apply a counting format, and that's fine. If the column's wider, the $ will stay on the left-hand side of the cell. A closely associated keystroke shortcut, but again slightly different, is Control Shift $. That's on the number 4 key. Watch the display difference here. The big obvious difference is that the $ are next to the numbers. Many people don't care where the $ is, and so if it doesn't bother them whether the $ is on the left side or next to the numbers, they'll use the keystroke shortcut or this would. But again, note the difference. The keystroke shortcut puts the $ next to the numbers. The symbol here, the accounting format, puts the $ out here. And once again, with negatives, I'll put negative here just for the moment. This is display we get on the $. What's Control Shift $ going to do for us? We see the difference. So you have to decide whether these shortcuts, which are not exactly identical to the buttons here, are going to work for you. There's no question they're fast. And let me change this back again. By pressing Control Z, back to here. A quick formula here for calculating percent of change equal. This is one of many different ways to write the formula. The later amount divided by the earlier amount minus 1. And the answer here we would want to see is a percent. And surely there's a percent button right there. And there's also a keystroke shortcut that is identical to it. And that's Control Shift %. And we see the display there. It's sort of a rule of thumb that if percentages are below 10, you want to see at least one decimal. So we could increase the decimal there. Recopy this, then copy the formulas downward by double-clicking. Now here, again, emphasizing the idea the keystroke shortcut and the symbol here are identical. Whether we click this or press Control Shift %, we get exactly the same display. In both cases, we would need, if we wished, to increase the decimal this way. Now, columns J and K have scientific information in them. Not everybody deals with that kind of information, but if you do, you are familiar with scientific type notation. Let's highlight both of these. Control Shift, the caret symbol above the number 6 key, displays these using scientific notation. The numbers in column J were well below 0, and this number here is readable as 6.32 times 10 to the minus 2. The numbers in column K, as we saw them, were well above 0. This is 1.65 times 10 to the 6th. Pressing Control Z again is to go back to remind ourselves the difference there. Control Shift caret. Now, the default format in any worksheet as we begin working with the worksheet is general. And many times we don't need to go back to a general format, but if that need were to arise, for example, in column D, if you want to display these in general format, and usually you don't want to go back to them, it's Control Shift tilde. That's the key just to the left of the number 1 key. And so all the shortcuts that we have used here in this movie are found next to each other on the keyboard, to the left of the number 1 key, and then reading down. As we actually read across the keyboard 1 through 6, here are all the shortcuts that we just used. They're adjacent to one another. And here and there, I think many people are going to use 3 or 4 of these on a frequent basis. I know I do. They're fast. They're easy. And again, there are some slight differences here and there with the buttons that we find on the Home tab. but they're a lot faster many times when you're dealing with data to simply press one of these keystroke shortcuts. Not every numeric formatting need is going to be met by a keystroke shortcut, and many times the choice that you need for a particular set of numbers is also not available in the number group on the Home tab. You may well be aware that the dialog box launcher in the lower right-hand corner of the number group does allow us, by way of format cells, to see quite a few different options this way. Keep in mind also, we can also get here with Control 1. Let's take a look at some of the data in this particular worksheet called Special Formats. Nothing really wrong with the date display in column A. However, there are some other alternates and quite a few built into Excel. Many times when we're formatting, particularly in database type layouts, it's going to be faster and easier to choose the entire column. And rather than clicking the column first, I'm simply going to be right-clicking column A and go right into Format Cells. And we're on the Number tab here. We want to be looking at some date layouts. Quite a few choices here. Notice some of them have zeros, some of them just show, for example, the day of the month and a 3-letter abbreviation for the month. This is ideal when the entries are all from the same year, but you see quite a few variations here. And I think for many people, they're going to find something they want here. So that's easily available. Just pick one of these, for example, for a difference here. Maybe a long display this way, that might be the one you want. It's going to take up more space, but if that's what you want, you've got it. About column B, same idea. I'm going to be right-clicking column B, going right into Format Cells this way. Time layouts. We see some choices there. Here, I think the number of choices for most people is going to boil down to either the second or the third one. Now, depending upon the kind of day that you have, if it does involve hours, minutes, and seconds, you might want to consider some of the others here. But I think for the most part, most people are going to gravitate toward one or two of these. Do note that you can display date and time together. That is appropriate for certain kinds of data. Now, Social Security number, this is not so obvious. Let's say that whoever put in the Social Security numbers here had a good idea, and the good idea was, why should I have to type those hyphens? Somehow there ought to be a way in Excel for Excel to do that. Well, there is a way. Ideally, what you want to do here, though, is do this even before you put in the data. But let's say, here's the data, nothing wrong with this. Right-click column D, Format Cells. In the Number tab here, we want to go to Special. And there we see Social Security number. Now we see the hyphens, but recognize as I click on cell D2, we don't see hyphens in the formula bar. If we happen to double-click here to edit, we don't see them. We don't want to be typing them. Why do all the work? Let Excel display these as part of the format. So if you're making a change here, maybe this had to be corrected, you put in a 7 or whatever it has to be, you don't deal with the hyphens at all, you just press enter. Same idea with phone numbers. We've got 2 sets of phone numbers here. And again, do this even before you put in the entries. Why type 14 characters when you need only type 10? Right-click Format Cells, Special, Phone Number. It handles 7 and 10-digit numbers. These days we rarely see just the 7, but nevertheless it handles both of those. We'll click OK and watch the display change. And here too, as with Social Security numbers, the symbols are not truly here. You don't see them in the formula bar. If you double-click, if you edit that way, you won't see them here as well, and you don't want to be typing them. Now, if you do get data from other sources, where these symbols actually are in place, it doesn't take too long. Now, they're not truly here, but if you really had these, you could do a quick search and replace all those left parentheses and right parenthesis space and hyphens with nothing. You have to do that in at least 3 steps. But then once you had your data in order from there on in, anytime you needed to make changes or additions, you wouldn't be typing all these extra characters. So be aware of those that are built in. Now, with fractions, I don't think too many people are using these as they might have in the past, particularly with stock market type quotes, but nevertheless, you will see these. In the example here, these are simple formulas. What might surprise you here is, with some of these, you might say, well, is that exactly even? We're seeing simple displays here. What if we're dealing with numbers where the quota was over 100? I'll make this be 102. Or maybe to make it more interesting, 100 and give an odd number there, 103. 126. That's not right exactly, is it? When you're displaying formats of this type, again, right-click Format Cells. There is a choice called Fraction, and note that it might be displaying these as a single digit, 2 digits, 3 digits, and users have to decide which is going to work for you. If I choose 1 digit here, I think you'll see this is not a great choice. Some of these are not really accurate. For example, this one here, that's not 5/8 really. It's close enough for most of us, but it's not really the case. So what you want to do in situations like this, and again, I don't think too many people use this, but just be aware that it's there. Format cells. If these are fractions, you might want to display 3 digits, 2 digits. In scientific type applications, this is a poor choice because these numbers, as we see them, are not exact. Now, we have the same situation here with regard to percents. We have some options out here as well too. And the standard rule of thumb on percents is if the percents are below 10, you want to show decimals, otherwise you don't need to. So I think many people would be happy with the displays here as well too. I don't think you'd want to use fractions here, but once again, if you were to use that, the format cells, you could go down that path and decide how many displays you want. Perhaps this way, perhaps not. So some ideas on how to display different kinds of numbers available again, typically by right-clicking. You can also press Ctrl+1 to get into the Format Cells dialog box and to explore lots of different options for different kinds of number displays. If you have unusual numeric formatting needs, and it's better that you don't, but if you do, you should be aware of something called a custom numeric format. In column B, we've got ID numbers, and maybe the way your company for years has displayed these ID numbers is to have 4 numbers, then a hyphen, and then 3 numbers. And the data in column B doesn't display that way. We'd like to be able to just type in numbers and have the hyphen appear there, perhaps in a similar way that we can do this with Social Security numbers. So let's right-click on column B here and choose Format Cells. And in the Format Cells dialog box on the Number tab, the last entry is Custom. If you've ever looked at this list and started to scroll through this, you could easily become overwhelmed. And without denigrating anybody, this looks a little geeky. That's the term we use sometimes, little nerdish perhaps. Now, I use this occasionally, and I'm not proclaiming any unusual expertise here. Occasionally, I understand what all these symbols mean, and then I forget. I don't use it very often, let's put it that way, but here and there you want to be aware of what some of the symbols mean. And it is, without focusing on these necessarily, let's start with a simple idea that in the early part of this list, you'll see zeros here and there. A single 0 simply means a numerical character. And if we're trying to explain what we're trying to do in column B, one way would be to say, we want to see 4 numbers, and then a hyphen, and then 3 numbers. So in the custom category, in the panel right under the word type, we can click in here, take out whatever's here, simply by typing over it. I want to represent 4 numbers, 0, 0, 0, 0. By the way, if there are leading zeros, I don't want any of those zeros suppressed, so I put in the 4 zeros, and then I'd like to see a hyphen. So I'm going to put double quote, hyphen, double quote, and then 3 zeros. Pressing enter, column B will be reformatted. This case, got to make the column wider. We'll double click right here and we see the display. And there's already a built-in format for phone number. But you may have seen, and I certainly have seen, phone numbers where the area code is followed by a period, and then the next 3 numbers, I used to call it exchange, is followed by a period, so let's change this. Column C, right-click, Format Cells, Custom, and we'll simply use a format of 3 zeros, double quote, period, double quote, 3 zeros, double quote, period, double quote, 4 zeros. So within double quotes, we don't see the double quote on the display, of course. We want a period. So embedded within the double quotes is the symbol that we want to put in here. And it doesn't have to be a period, but this one certainly is used from time to time. Once again, readjusting the column width. So that's a different way to display this, so you can make up your own. I think you get the idea on how you might do that for some of these. Now in columns E and G or some other unusual formats, and maybe a little strange here and there, but on the other hand, you should know how to do these. And here's a tip too, when you do see numbers like this displayed, suppose I sent you this worksheet and you might say, well, I wonder how you got that or how this happened. right-click on one of these, like this one, go to Format Cells, and there is the display. And there it is. Now, that's not so obvious either. What is it? General, and then you see asterisk period. And what that means. General asterisk period. Maybe take a look at this one here. Right-click Format Cells. What are we seeing here? Asterisk underscore general. Well, maybe you figured out, maybe you haven't, but the asterisk in these particular formats, these custom formats, signify that whatever follows the asterisk will be repeated. And then if there's anything else in the description, that will be used. So what we're doing here is preceding numerical general type formats with as many underscores as is necessary to fill in the column. I know that's a mouthful, but again, asterisk followed by underscore, we're going to use as many underscores as is necessary along with the general format of the number to fill in the particular cell. So these numbers are of different width. We see what's happening here in all these cases here. They all have the same format. And here, once again, revisiting this format, right-click Format Cells, we see asterisk period following the word general. So the numbers go in first, then trailing periods. And so the more of these you see, the more you pick up on them. In this one here, possibly, and probably how this was done is these were initially formatted. Let's take a look at this first of all. Right-click Format Cells. And here the details may be a bit much, but the key element of this is the asterisk followed by period. Now, probably the way these were set up was that someone did apply currency or accounting format and then made the adjustment. So here's some numbers down here. Maybe these numbers here might look good if they had leading dots, not dollar signs, but dots. So how might we do this? If we'd like to see commas as well, maybe we'll choose comma first up here. Maybe we don't want the decimals, we'll decrease twice. And now, right-click Format Cells. Here's the current format, and without going through all the details here, behind the asterisk here, in the particular format for this cell here, we're going to put a period and then get rid of the space. Now, another bit of information about this, when you see semicolons here on numerical formatting displays, this is the display that will be used if it's positive. Then we see a semicolon. This is what's going to be used when it's negative. We want to cover all bases here. The key element again is after the asterisk here, we want to put in a period and then delete the space that follows it. And we'll do that one more time out here. Period, delete the space, and click OK. And now we've got our leading periods or dots in this format. So you may or may not need to experiment with some of these, but just by seeing a few examples, you will get some ideas. If you have greater interest in this, there are a number of different books, the Excel in-depth books, that usually have 8 or 10 pages on various kinds of custom formats that you might be interested in. In addition to all the built-in formats for dates and times, you might want to display the date and time in your particular way. The data in this particular worksheet is the same all the way across columns A through F in the following sense. Cell A1 has a date 8/7/2010, we see it in the formula bar. It's displayed differently in B1, but it's the exact same date, and in C1, and D1, E1, and F1. Same thing over and over and over again. But how do we change these displays? Column C has a standard built-in display. Couple things to note about it. The day of the week is spelled out, the month is spelled out, and the date is put in as 2 digits, and so the dates before the 10th have a leading 0. So you might want to make some changes here. I'm going to right-click on column C and go to Format Cells. Here's the display that's being used. Now, if you want to alter this and build your own custom date format, simply switch the category to Custom. Now, not exactly obvious, but 4 Ds here represent the full spelling of day of the week. In the same display, you see 2 Ds over here. That means that the day is going to be displayed as a number with a leading 0. If we put in a single D in this portion of the format, it means that the date will only display one number if it's before the 10th. The other dates will be 2 digits. If we want an abbreviated day of the week, we'll put in 3 Ds. So just wipe out this existing information here, put in 3 Ds. If we want, for example, to show SAT and MON and that sort of thing. The 4 M's mean the month is spelled out. Suppose you want an abbreviation there. Pick out one of those M's. You see the change. 3 characters for the day of the week, 3 characters for the month. And maybe do the same kind of thing here, slightly differently in column D, format cells. Maybe this time we might want to even change the order. So here too, we could jump into custom. Maybe we'll put the month first. 3 M's. Spell it out, possibly. We can put in a space, maybe. Let's put in the day of the week. I probably wouldn't put it in this order typically, but let's put in 4 D's. Maybe we'll spell it out. So that's likely to be what? That's going to be AUG, Saturday. In other words, you're in control of how you put in the display here. Saturday, this would be a little bit strange. This would be AUG, SAT, 07. Let's take out the leading 0, put in a single D. Click OK. I think most of us probably wouldn't use that kind of display, but you quickly get the idea, and by jumping back in here with right-click format cells, you can see how you could use M's and D's and Y's in a variety of different combinations. If you want only a 2-digit year, put in 2 Y's, and so on and so on. Now the display in column E is unusual, and we see actually the year displayed, and by right-clicking on one of these entries, you can see pretty quickly what's going on here. 4 Y's, 2 M's, 2 D's. And there too, we could put in hyphens if we wanted to, very simply here, by doing this. Do it this way. I only did that for one of the cells, but you see that kind of display as well. So there are quite a few variations on how you can do this. And I wouldn't say you need to have all these, but just be aware of that capability. And you can also insert words and phrases here. And these entries here, it looks as if they are times of days, but what if they were simply amount of time elapsed? In other words, what if the display here were different? We'll change it this way. And let's say that the actual nature of these are different so that they truly represent, maybe in the elapsed time period, there's no heading at the top, a different way to display these, and not so obvious, but here's what we can do here. What if we switch to custom here, and in the display here, we use H followed by double quote, and anything within double quotes will appear as text, so we might have a leading space. I'm going to type in the word hours, space AND, space double quote. So we want to see the actual hours followed by the phrase space hours, space and space, and then what? M. Now here it doesn't mean month, it's going to mean minutes. And following that, we want within double quotes a space, and then minutes. Double quote, so that we see the entry being displayed this way. And again, that display under format cells, you see it right here, bring it down, see them both together. There's the display. So you can imagine quite a few variations on this in terms of displaying. I think you're more likely to change the display with dates, but also with times, as we're seeing the example here. You do have control over your own custom formats for date and times. You can quickly change a worksheet and perhaps add a little flair simply by changing a font design or the size of a font. The title in cell A1 here is a so-called Broadway font, and of course we can see in the font group on the Home tab the current font being used. Cell A3, for example, uses the default in Excel the Calibri font. Recognize that when we do click on cell A1, we see this choice, and with the drop arrow, we can certainly explore quite a few others. And as we slide over these, we're not clicking, of course, we can see quite a few different choices and see them as they will appear on the worksheet. This could be a real time waster if you're not careful, just so many choices out here. And again, you use the choices that fit your particular needs. Easy and fast changes there for sure. And the color of them can be changed just as easily with the drop arrow, this to the right of the font color button. And here and there we slide across different choices. And with white backgrounds, generally we want to choose a darker color for readability purposes, like this one for example. And there will be times when we want to change multiple cells, of course just hide a few cells, and again explore some of those many options. If these colors are not the ones that you want, you might want to explore using different themes, or possibly click the More Colors option. And you've got 127 color choices here, along with some blacks and grays as well. If you would like all of these to revert to the more or less standard font colors, then there is a choice you may have seen there with the drop arrow called automatic. And it simply uses the black standard background there. I would strongly suggest that you not change the colors of numerical cells, particularly in accounting environments, because there are standard techniques there for making negatives appear in red automatically. And although maybe a little bit of trivia, in Excel 2010 and Excel 2007, the standard font is Calibri size 11. In prior versions, it was Arial size 10. And as we look at the two next to each other here, they certainly look very, very similar in style, slight difference here and there. A small point, but one that could be confusing, this cell here actually is size 12. You see that, but looking within the font group here, we see it's 12, this is 11. But when you do highlight a cluster of cells, and you're wondering which font is being used and what size is being used, you could make the mistake of saying, well, looks like they're all, what, Calibri 11? Well, that is the size of the active cell, but the others are not necessarily that. And so by changing this, of course, we are saying make them all be 11. And of course, this one now is 11 as well, too. If you do want to save a little bit of ink here for printing purposes, you might use a different font called Century, and you'll find it in the list here too. As somebody did some research on this, bold, if you want to use 20% less ink, use this particular format. So there are quite a few different formats to be sure. The sizes are easy to get to, and we're talking about those easy to reach buttons in the font group on the Home tab. Most important one is for changing the font color, if that's your focus, or the actual font itself, or the numbers, all together here on that font group. In this particular worksheet called Custom Font Colors, you'll recognize that in column A, we do have numbers there with different colors, but there's something a little different going on here. I'm going to click on one of these, for example, the cell A2. Maybe I want to make this one green. If I click the font button here, as I slide over these, we're not seeing any changes at all, so something's a little unusual here. What's happening? Primarily for historical reasons, but something that you might encounter anyway, and something that you could possibly use, there is a way to apply formats by way of a custom format. By simply selecting one of the cells and right-clicking and going to Format Cells, you're going to see something unusual, a special custom format. And this is a little harder to read here, so what I'm going to do is simply drag across it and press Control-C and cancel. And then display is a bit larger right here. Space Control V, the format that's being used in column A, and by inference you can figure out what it's now doing, says the following. If any cell in here is greater than or equal to 80, it's going to be blue. The double zero happens to relate to the particular format, two numerical entries. Magenta is being used for those that are greater than or equal to 70. And of course that means those that are below 80 at the same time, so the logic is inclusive as we move from left to right. So the blues are the 80 and above, the magentas are those that are 70 up through, but just short of 80, and the greens are all the others, and we see how it's being used. Now, with some of the expanded conditional formatting capability that you will have available in Excel 2010 as well as in Excel 2007, these are less frequently used, but in older worksheets, you still might see them. They're still viable and they still work. And it does provide a different way of providing custom formatting for fonts based on numerical entries. The colors that can be used within brackets are listed right here in column C. Those are the only choices you have available. You can certainly use other kinds of logic here using the arrows and the equal to sign. But again, primarily for historical reasons and the fact that you may encounter them, a way to use custom formats to apply colors within a worksheet. In this worksheet, you can see a variety of different border styles being applied to make the data offset stand out a bit. You'll also notice that the grid lines have been turned off. If you are going to apply borders, as we see, for example, in columns B and C over in column E, probably it shows up a bit better if we're not seeing the grid lines. Remember, you can click the View tab and add or take off grid lines. Throughout the entire worksheet, it's an on-off button. It's grid lines. And we'll share the difference in a second here. Now, Suppose I want to put a border on these cells here. Right-click, Format Cells, and don't always count on the border tab having been active. It depends on what you've done recently, but if it isn't, click the border tab. Now, possibly when you're adding borders, you might want to consider color. So you might start with that feature first. You don't necessarily do that one first. Maybe we want an orange color here. And then you pick a border style. Do you want a thick line, a double line, some other variation here? Do you want this border just on the perimeter as it might look here? Or do you want it on the inside cells as well? So possibly there. I doubt if you're going to use this one very often, you might not. You can also click the various components in this display area here too. For example, if I click the one on the right, then I wouldn't really want to proceed with that, but that's a possibility, or click it again. And here and there, depending upon what's being outlined, sometimes you might consider that variation as well. So as we click OK here, we'll see some changes. And again, it's always a good idea once you've applied changes, click outside of it. Here it's pretty clear what's going on, but you might want to turn off the grid lines anyway. It accentuates what we've done here more clearly. If there's a particular set of cells where you simply want to put a simple border on, suppose on these cells here, there is a keystroke shortcut, Control, Shift, ampersand, above the number 7 key, puts a simple border around the highlighted cells. Again, click outside of the area to see what's happened. If you would like to get rid of borders, maybe you decide these borders here just don't serve much purpose, maybe, and then there are two different kinds here as well. Highlight all of these, keystroke shortcut, Control, Shift, underscore, and that removes all borders within the selected area. Now there's also a way to draw a grid. You see the grids here, you can actually draw these if you wish. It does mean resurrecting a feature out of Excel's past. If you right-click anywhere in the Quick Access toolbar, you can choose Customize Quick Access Toolbar and choose commands from Choose All Commands. And in this choice here, we'll see a number of draw border features. And you might want to experiment with some of the different ones, but I'm going to use the last one here, which is called Draw Borders. Add, click OK. Now, you might later remove this from the Quick Access toolbar, so because you don't use it very often, you certainly have that option. I'm going to use it now, so I'm going to click this button, and I might want to consider just a simple, maybe I'll use this dash line here. I want to use the dash line, and I could add color, so I'll click this again. This isn't exactly the fastest way. Maybe use a dark green here. And then I'll come back a third time possibly to do what? Either I'm about to draw just an outer border or maybe a border grid. And down here, I want to draw a border grid starting at this point. So come back up here, choose Draw Border Grid. It activates the pointer. Notice the dots in the worksheet as well. I want to grid over this section right here. By pressing Escape, those other dots that we see out here will disappear. So you can either draw a grid as I did here, or the other approach. Now, it does take a little longer to have to constantly go back and forth to that particular tool, so that may not be something you'll use that often, but there is a way to do that as well. I think if you get used to the standard way of doing this, it's going to work pretty smoothly for most people. And again, a reminder, you can quickly get into Format Cells a variety of ways. Control-1 is another way. Activate this particular dialog box, and if border isn't selected, select it, and then pursue some of the options that we saw earlier within this particular dialog box. You can clearly see in this worksheet that cells have been colored, color backgrounds have been added, but you might not know. But you might be seeing for the first time here that you can also use patterns within cells. And many times these are not a great idea. I think I wouldn't make a strong case for saying this is a great feature, but here and there it's going to make some sense. You might also occasionally want to use lines like this to separate data, in other words, put them into an empty row. Let's just show how we can do this here. Maybe we want to either change this or make a different pattern. Let's begin by right-clicking and jumping right into Format Cells. And for the highlighted area, we want to click the Fill tab. We see colors here, pattern styles listed here. Click the drop arrow, and I think you'll see almost immediately if we use a choice like this, the in horizontal crosshairs, you see what this isn't likely to be. You can apply a color along with that at the same time. Let's say that wouldn't be a very good choice for any cells that have data that you're trying to read. So the better choice here might be one that has a very skimpy dot display this way, or possibly this one a little denser. You will have to experiment with this a little bit. The pattern color itself, would you want that to be a different color? Now we have red dots instead of black dots, so you can even go that far if you wish. So we're going to change the look of this by using a slightly different pattern style, slightly denser use of dots, and a color as well. That's the color of the dots. Click OK. And you see the difference. And I'll press Ctrl Z to remind you how that did look, and I'll press Ctrl Y to go back and forth. Back again. So different approaches there. Over here is something a little bit fanciful, sort of show-offy really. I don't think too many people would use this, but same location here, right-click Format Cells. And here what we would use possibly is Fill Effects. And you can see the two colors here that have been used. See them in the background? Of course, you got tons of choices here. You could waste a lot of time on this one, couldn't ya? There's green and yellow. It's actually being used in the previous example. So how about some different colors here? Some greens and blues. You mix them different ways. Decide how you want them to look here. Maybe it's this one, maybe that one. You can even do diagonal. I think you could waste a lot of time here, couldn't ya? How about these? Click OK. Green on top and bottom, bluish in the center. There we go. So you have that look one by one. So just fast, easy ways to change the look of certain worksheets, and here and there, perhaps it adds a light touch to the worksheet or just makes it a little bit more interesting, but you can add patterns to cells as well as colors. Most Excel users, even beginning Excel users, quickly have become proficient with alignment formatting. For example, in these cells right here, some of us would leave the cells looking just the way they are, but if we'd like to right align the data, in the alignment group on the Home tab in the ribbon, surely right alignment makes sense. Center may be your preference. Either one can be changed. In column G, these cells here look perfectly fine in their default location. Notice that sometimes you don't see any alignment buttons that appear to have been chosen, so the default location left alignment of non-numeric data is automatic. We might want to center these or even right align them occasionally. That looks better to some people's eyes, so these are pretty easy to get to. And most Excel users know them pretty readily and quickly. I might point out here that with numeric entries, there's some other thinking going on that might occur to you. I have seen data like this where people would like to center data, and I want to suggest that that's a bad idea. If you're dealing with accounting type information, particularly when it has decimals, centering numbers is not a great idea. And what you might find too is if you try to center these, as I'm about to do here, that maybe what happened here, a mix of reactions. And Excel's a little bit inconsistent about this. Look what happens in these cells here. And earlier I just tried this button, it didn't change. I'm trying to left align it, I'm trying to center it. Now there's a slight wiggle there with the dollar sign moving around a little bit, but the date itself isn't. Now these are in accounting format, activated or created with the dollar sign button here. If you use the keystroke shortcut for applying currency, or if you happen to just right click, go to Format Cells and choose Currency Format, and maybe concerned about negatives isn't an issue here, but we want two decimals, the dollar sign. Let's click OK. The only obvious change there was the dollar sign, which you may have seen before, but try centering the numbers now. We can. Again, this is a bad idea, I think, and left aligning is too. But the fact that you can do it with some formats and not others can be a little bit confusing. With numerical information, keep it on the right side. If it's strictly numbers and you don't have dollar signs and/or commas, maybe it's still in general format. Again, think out the issues of how you want alignment to occur. But as a general rule, unless the numbers happen to be ID numbers, keep them in their native right-aligned state. They look best like this. Now, new in Excel 2007 and also in Excel 2010, we have available already, without any kind of customizing, alignment buttons for aligning data in the top, middle, or bottom of cells. And in this particular worksheet, in the upper left corner, is a graphic that more or less depicts what we mean by these, and is pretty apparent once you try one or two of these buttons. This date, of course, says top left, and you see the two icons that are currently active in the alignment group on the Home tab here, top, middle. And again, notice how the change here. So the three to lower alignment buttons have to do with the left to right alignment of data within cells. The three upper buttons have to do with the top down alignment. So as you might expect, as we click here, we're still within the left to right. Actually, we call it middle this time. Sometimes you see the words center and middle used interchangeably, but you get the idea pretty quickly as you compare these with those different combinations that we have here. And many times when you're considering centering data in the top bottom cells, it's pertinent when the cell is taller than usual. If we had just normal data here and these rows were of typical height, obviously this graphic doesn't make a lot of sense right now. But do think of those situations where perhaps you've got wrapping text, and when you do, then you want to consider how the text appears within a cell. The alignment buttons, as we've seen them being used here and prior in the data here, are easily accessible in the alignment group on the Home tab of the ribbon. For simply adding visual appeal to a worksheet or maybe to improve readability, you might want to consider using angled text. I'm about to highlight the months here along with total and average, and in the alignment group on the Home tab, the angled choices appear here, angled counterclockwise. Common choice, I think perhaps more common than the one below it, angled counterclockwise. Here and there you certainly have your choices, and we can see how quickly this happens. Now in the same worksheet, and I've separated a bit, and you'll see why in a minute, off to the right here in columns N through Z here, we see some other data, and here the text is aligned vertically. You might want to consider this option as well. Vertical alignment, and yet it doesn't say vertical alignment, it says rotate text up, and you see its opposite, rotate text down. I doubt if you'll want to choose vertical text because once people see this, most people say, never mind. That's hard to read. Maybe here and there you might find a good use for that, but I don't see it very much myself. So these are pretty obvious choices once you get used to using them. By the way, this has absolutely no impact on the ability to sort the data and manipulate it, but you'll notice something else that's happened here, and it was already set up in this particular list. I'm actually going to remove the feature and then put it back. In addition to the angled text here, these cells have borders on them. Now I'm going to use a keystroke shortcut to take off the borders. It's Control-Shift_. You can also do that with right-clicking and going into Format Cells. But I think to a lot of people's minds, this is not as good looking as it had been before. This is not as appealing as it had been before. And actually I could have done that over here as well. Once again, Control-Shift_. So here's how it looks without borders. Now there are two kinds of borders that will make it look, I think, for many people more appealing. Let's right-click, use Format Cells, and simply put a perimeter outline border on these cells. Take a look at this. And that's not quite what we saw before, but that could be what you want. Perhaps better from some people's perspective is, with these cells highlighted, right-click, Format Cells. This time also choose Inside so that we see lines around all the cells. Now I'm going to press Ctrl-Z a couple of times to remind you how this did look. Like that, click outside of it compared with, and now I'm pressing Ctrl-Y to repeat. So again, we're not talking about a major feature here in terms of the overall impact of your worksheet, but just the idea that slanting text, and I think 45 degrees is the most common choice, is easy to get to. And keep in mind too that if you happen to highlight the cells and choose the alignment dialog box launcher this way, and go to the alignment tab, you can certainly change the angles by dragging this or typing in a different entry here. And what we had done earlier with vertical text could have been done this way, choosing the text, putting in the other unusual way this way as well too. So you have these capabilities available here as well. I think it's faster from using the existing toolbars, and again, it focuses on the features that people are most likely to use the angled text at 45 degrees, so easy features to get to. It adds visual appeal to some worksheets, and in some cases does increase readability. In this worksheet called Indenting, you'll notice that in column A, the text entries, rows 5, 6, 7 begin at different locations here. And potentially, someone could have put in leading spaces here, but if you do attempt to display data differently with spaces, you don't always get the exact alignment that you want. And there are two buttons on the Alignment tab, and there are two buttons in the Alignment group on the Home tab designed specifically for indenting. And by the way, you will notice that there are some keystroke shortcuts listed here. I recommend that you not use them. Depending upon the operating system, you might be pressing one of these combinations here, and you'll end up switching to another application, and it'll completely throw you sometimes, so I recommend do not use these. The buttons are easily accessible, and let's apply them in this particular worksheet where it would make most sense right now. We can certainly read this data, but These are, in a certain sense, and we're talking about outlining characteristics, these words here would look better if they were indented to the right. Simply click this button, increase the indent. Here we go, maybe do it again. Or maybe we want to go back one. That's the other button to the left. You may recognize these buttons that also exist in Microsoft Word. They're kind of funny looking, but they certainly do the job fast and easy. And they're designed primarily for text entries. Recognize it up above. This was already done. These are indented, maybe more than they need to be. So we will decrease the indent, moving in this way possibly. And again, you can easily manipulate these, move them back and forth a little bit to have them display the way it's most effective to you. A side benefit of this, although not a great one, is that it also controls the placement of dollar signs. And to accentuate this idea, I'm going to make column B considerably wider than it needs to be, at least for the moment. And I see nothing wrong with this display at all, but on the other hand, if I want to move the dollar sign inward a little bit to the right, I will click the button here for increasing the indent. It simply pulls in the dollar sign a bit. Now, if you always wanted the dollar sign right next to the data, then you may very well know that you could use currency format here instead of the existing accounting format, but these buttons have the effect here of moving the dollar sign. But the primary purpose of indenting is simply to move text over. And by doing it, by using the buttons here, we don't have to worry about alignment issues because it aligns the data perfectly. And again, just experiment with the two. They're fast and easy to get to. Increase the indent or decrease the indent. In this worksheet entitled Merge Center, if you were about to print this or use it perhaps in a presentation, it would make sense to center the information that we see in rows 1 and 2. And rather than taking the information which actually is in cell A1 and deciding whether to move it to C1 or D1 and just guessing as how it might look, instead of doing that or trying to put in leading spaces, why not simply select all the cells in which we want this to be centered along with the data? And we might be interested in doing the same thing with the row below this too, so you might start by selecting both of these. Now the feature we're talking about is in the alignment group on the home tab of the ribbon. It's called Merge and Center. However, if you try this feature, you will get a warning suggesting, based on what I've just done, that I'm not going to get that data from row 2 placed properly. It's going to merge these into one cell, keep the upper leftmost data only. So let's cancel this. Looks as if we need to do these separately. I'll do one of them and then come back and show you a way to handle both at once. Let's just focus first on this idea. Highlight this, merge and center. There we are. So what has happened? Well, the most obvious thing that has happened is that the data is centered left-right within those cells. Not so obvious at first maybe is that this is one cell. This is all part of cell A1, and there is no B1 or C1 or D1, etc. in this worksheet for the moment. All the data is in A1. We did a merge and center. Now, if we really did want to take care of the second one again, it wouldn't take us that long, but let me press Control Z here and then select this group of cells, letting go of the left mouse button, use the Control key, and then highlight the second row. So it's two different selections. Then we can press Merge and Center. It takes care of both of these at once. And most of the time, this feature is used for centering titles. It's fast and it's efficient, and nearly always the examples that you see are horizontal. But you can use these in a vertical way as well. And I wouldn't suggest that we necessarily must do that in this case. But to give this portion of the worksheet a different look, imagine if we could put the word expenses in column K here. So let's first move that over here. I'll just drag it and get rid of these cells here. Right-click, delete, shift cells up. Let's rotate this, make it vertical, but not the vertical option under alignment, but rotate text up this way. But then let's merge this and center it across these cells. Merge and center, make the column a little bit narrower, and then the last thing to do here would be to put this in the middle. When we're talking about vertical alignment, middle align this way, and possibly one other choice too, make that text bigger. Or add another word or phrase. Now, again, we've got more crying needs sometimes, but that has a certain look to it, and maybe adding a background color would be something you'd want to do too. And a border, and so on, all the different things we do, so you can use it in that way too. Again, a little show-offy maybe, but I think the major use, the more prominent use of this is what we used here in rows 1 and 2, simply to center titles across a worksheet. If you work with large lists of data in Excel, you're used to the concept that titles should be in a single row, and they are here in this example. But column A is a lot wider than it needs to be because the title is so wide. We might consider putting the word employee above the two words last name. Couple of ways to do this. I'm going to right-click on cell A1 and jump right into Format Cells. And you'll see the choice called Wrap Text. Now, sometimes you're going to be disappointed with this. You'll click OK and nothing really happened. Well, let's make the column narrower, about there or there. Still nothing happening. Let's double-click the boundary between row 1 and 2. And we see what's happening. Now, that's fine and works well many times, and sometimes you'll highlight a bunch of cells. To do that, we could have done that here as well. You can also do this manually. And here you control where the break occurs. Now in this case, there are only 2 words, so it's pretty obvious we want the break between the 2. Another way to approach this, and you could do this from the moment of initial typing, is after typing the 2011. So I'm going to double click in here right behind the 11. I'm going to press Alt-Enter. And there's a space in front of it, and press Delete and Enter. So is that any better than what we just did here? Well, it's slightly faster. We can now double click the boundary here to adjust the width, but when we apply the command feature here, the wrap doesn't always occur where we want it to, and that's why Alt-Enter is going to be better here as well too. And if I want tax rate on the bottom and 2010 on top, I'm going to double click just behind the 2010. And by the way, you can also do this up in the formula bar as well. I'm going to press Alt-Enter, Delete, and make the entry that way. Now, if this is a new worksheet, I'm going to quickly create a new one. If you're creating titles and now you're simply trying to put in from the beginning text on top of text, for example, you just might type the data this way. Employee, Alt-Enter, name, if that's what you want the title to be. We're finished, move on to the next cell, and so on. And sometimes you'll see a row taller than it needs to be as well too. So I suggest you wait until you get the other data in here. Another example might be 2011, Alt-Enter salary. And maybe in this cell, we want to see 2011 tax rate. And if the entries below are going to be pretty narrow, why not have a couple of Alt-Enters here? In other words, we'll put the data on 3 lines. So 2011, Alt-Enter, tax, Alt-Enter, rate, enter. We'll see the data that way. And a follow-up, this would, of course, would probably be for many people to align the data either in the top, meaning top or bottom, or possibly center this way. So you can achieve the wrap text in 2 different ways, either by typing Alt-Enter or editing and using Alt-Enter, or by using, by way of the right mouse button in Format Cells, the wrap text option. Notice even if you apply the feature manually, as I did in these 3 cells, the wrap text box here is checked. Now, another option, going back to the previous worksheet, wrap text, is instead of using the wrap text, let me come back in here, Format Cells, and uncheck the option. Another potential option, which may work or may not depending upon what your needs are, is to actually shrink the text. Now, suppose you've decided and you've looked up and down column A for a bit, you want your column to be about that wide. How can we shrink the text? Right-click Format Cells, and there's a choice called Shrink to Fit. This is not a great option, but it gets the job done. It will put the data that way. Now, I think in this example, it's too small. I'll make it a little bit wider, and you saw the text grow. If you happen to click here, and if you weren't aware of this feature, I think you'd be thrown because you would see in the font group in the Home tab, this says size 11. You say, well, I want to make it bigger. You make it 16 or something. And what's happening here? Nothing. Nothing at all. I'm going to press Control-Z here to undo this. So it still says 11, but nothing really has changed. So not a great feature, but you might see it here and there. And I think it does have its potential uses, but be a little bit careful with the fact that it doesn't, by looking in the formula bar, describe what really is going on. So right click here, Format Cells. That's called Shrink to Fit. I'll uncheck the box, go back to here, and either double click to bring back the information this way or possibly reinstitute the wrap capability that we saw earlier. Despite all the advantages of the formatting tools being so readily available in the ribbon, either in the font group, the alignment group, and the number group, there are still times when we need to go behind the scenes. And we stressed repeatedly in this course the idea that at any time when you press Control-1, you activate the Format Cells dialog box. And all those various additional choices on the Number tab, the Alignment tab, the Font tab, the Border tab, Fill tab, and Protection, most of these are available in the ribbon, with some exceptions. Now, As a reminder, you can also activate that toolbar strictly on the Font tab at any time by pressing Ctrl-Shift-F. It always activates the Format Cells dialog box with the Font tab active. And anytime we right-click a cell, we see the choice Format Cells as well. And in addition, what we also see is the so-called mini toolbar here. And as you get more familiar with this and you see it around, and notice that in the example here, it's below the drop-down menu. If I happen to right-click on a cell toward the top of the worksheet right here, if I'm about to consider a formatting change, maybe that formatting change is on the mini toolbar here. We see it displayed above the menu. And so, of course, here are those many choices that we certainly can get to from the ribbon up above, but they're right close to the data. Now you'll also see this mini toolbar be activated when you're editing a cell, although not at first. Maybe I want to make some editing changes here in cell A10. That's a text entry over here on the left-hand side. So I'll double click. While I'm editing, where's that mini toolbar? Maybe I want this word to be red or blue or italic. And as I highlight, you can faintly see a mini toolbar, we might say, with just some features here. So if I want to make this red, there's a font color, maybe I'll do that. But you can see how the mini toolbar gets activated this way too. So the main purpose of this, of course, is just to give us a few of those likely choices we would be making here, gathered from the various groups in the ribbon, activated when we're actually editing cells. And so maybe we'll complete the entry here and press enter and move on. So that's going to be active at different times. Be on the lookout for it. You might overlook it at times. So anytime you need more depth than what we are able to get off of the existing groups in the ribbon, either by choosing Format Cells to the varying ways, Format Cells, or by right-clicking, or by pressing Ctrl-1 or Ctrl-Shift-F to activate the font group there. Different ways to activate formatting, put the information right at our fingertips. Although Excel has numerous formatting tools immediately available on the Home tab, in the Font group, the Alignment group, and the Number group, and also in Styles and Cells, sometimes it might make sense if you have unusual formatting needs to take advantage of the fact that the Format Cells dialog box, which you can activate in a number of different ways, does allow you to explore some of the more unusual formatting features that you might need. I've selected the data here in cells B6 through I6. And a quick reminder of the ways to get to Format Cells. We can certainly right-click, go to Format Cells that way. We can press Ctrl-1. If you know that you must go to the Font tab, you can also press Ctrl-Shift-Tab instead. And certainly on each of the groups that we see in the ribbon for font alignment, we see there's dialog box launchers. So no matter how we get here, what's the advantage of using this particular dialog box over the buttons? The advantage could be that when you need to apply multiple formats, they're pretty much all at your fingertips here. In other words, you might have an unusual number format that isn't available from the ribbon. Maybe it's some kind of a special number format that you might want to use here. You might have some special alignment needs that are a little bit unusual that are not found in the alignment group. And we've got font choices here too. Maybe you want to use bold and italic together. Apply color, use some special underlining. In other words, we can approach a variety of different formattings at the same time while we're within this dialog box. So there could be a tendency to overdo this and do too many things at once, but let's make a couple of changes here just to emphasize the idea. I want to change this particular design here to have negatives if they appear to have a leading minus. I won't make any alignment changes here. Let's change the font to do bold and italic both. Maybe we'll put a border on these cells. How about an outer border, an inner border? Just use maybe an unusual border type this way. There we go. Fill, we might want to use a different color here, possibly a pattern with it. In other words, we're accomplishing a number of different objectives at the same time. And a lot of these features we can't get too quickly from the buttons that are found in the ribbon. And when we're finally finished, we click OK. I wouldn't say that's a great format. But another issue comes up too. If we need to apply these same formatting features in a different location here, we could select those cells and simply press F4 or Ctrl-Y. And all the actions that were taken within that dialog box could be achieved at the same time. So again, ignoring perhaps unattractive look at this, it's the idea that sometimes when you're performing multiple formatting actions, it might be more efficient to use that Format Cells dialog box. Excel has a number of techniques for quickly copying formats, not content, but formats. A couple of examples in this worksheet come to mind. One easy way certainly is to copy by first selecting the data in question. We want to copy the format of all these cells to the lower ones we see here. One standard technique is to simply right-click and copy this. Now you could also press Control-C, and rather than highlighting all of this data here, we need only highlight the cell in the upper left-hand corner, the receiving area, right-click, and then under Paste Special, there is an option here for copying just the formatting. In the previewing we do see immediately, we'll simply choose formatting. So we've copied the formats, not the content. Content is obviously different in these cases. Now, a couple of other ideas too, though, and occasionally these are going to surprise you because they don't do always what you think. I'm going to, let's say on purpose, maybe we're having a meeting, I want this number to stand out a little bit, so maybe I will apply a different color background, something like that, just a slight difference. Now, sometimes you lose your train of thought, or maybe a few days pass, you're thinking about something else, you say, I like the look of that, I think I'll copy that format into column A. Well, the primary visual feature that you might be thinking of is the color. So let's right-click and copy this, and then highlight these cells, and right-click and paste just the formats like we did before, do it that way. And that seems to work just fine. You say, well, I'll do that over in column J as well too. As long as these so-called marquee rights are visible, we can continue to paste repeatedly. And we're going to highlight these dates over here. They will do the whole column anyway. Right-click, Paste Special, and we'll be doing the formatting as well. And of course, the preview might stop you, but you go ahead and click. I think you see what's happened here. We have copied the color for sure. But formatting really does mean not just colors, but all those various features that we see on the Home tab, not only fonts and those characteristics, but also alignment tools and formatting and numeric formatting and so on. So a lot has been copied here. I'm going to press Control-Z and reconsider different ways to do this, but if it's simply color, you might as well do this manually. In other words, figure out the color here, and then apply that color to the other cells in question. Now, another technique for copying is pretty fast. It's called the Format Painter. How about these cells here? They look pretty good. Why don't I click the Format Painter and then simply click cell B10. Good enough. It's fast, it's easy. Once again, many times when we're copying, we're using a cluster of cells or a group of cells, and the receiving area is simply one cell. We might change all of these displayed numbers here to include dollar signs, and we could have done the group down below. Another way to copy formats is to drag with the right mouse button. So I'm going to drag this entire list here downward with the right mouse button, pop it on top of these numbers, and as I let go, there's a menu. Copy here as formats only. So a number of different techniques for copying. And again, making this a little bit contrived perhaps, but this cell has a certain color. I'm also going to make it bold and italic because I want it to stand out at the next meeting. I'll maybe double click here to make the column wider. Let's change the font as well. Make it blue or something. Okay, we'd like to copy this to a few other selected cells. How might we do it? Double click Format Painter and then maybe click there. Drag across these two cells. Obviously, we got some column width adjustments to make. Drag across those two, and we can do this indefinitely until we press the Escape key. If you are familiar with this in Microsoft Word, it works the same way. So by double-clicking Format Painter, we are copying the cell that was active at that time into other locations, and we're only copying the format, of course. And eventually, when you're finished copying the format, you want to press Escape, and then the examples here will simply drag across the top, double-click, and we made the quick adjustment. So we are able to copy a format to multiple non-adjacent locations by double-clicking on the Format Painter. So quite a few different options for copying formats within and across different worksheets. If you've ever copied information from Microsoft Word or perhaps off the internet, you sometimes run into a situation where you've got a sentence or a lot of text, for example, like we see here in C2. It's a description of the numbers below. This seems to go on and on and on. And rather than trying to copy this into cells below this and then chopping it off and editing it, there is a feature in Excel known as Justify. Let's imagine that this text here, it's about 250 characters or so, actually a little bit more than that. And a little tip here too, by the way, when you look in the formula bar and you sense that there's more text and you can't read all of it, if you simply Put the mouse on the lower part of the formula bar. You can drag this downward and see more text this way. Another way to do this too is also on the right-hand side, you'll see a drop arrow there. Possibly use the up and down arrows to see different lines, but not at the same time, or use the drop arrow. Now, it doesn't always open to exactly the height that you want it to, so possibly you can drag it around there. But the real focus of what we're talking about here is the ability to rewrap this text without taking much time. And let's imagine that you want this text to fit into this many columns wide right here. Let's just highlight this portion of it. Now, it's worth noting that the actual data is in cell C2. It really isn't in D2, E2, etc. It's in C2, so you must, of course, highlight the C2 and then other cells to the right, and you will want to experiment with this. The feature we're about to use is on the Home tab. It's in the Editing group, and it's called Fill, and then Justify. And nearly always you will get this message. Text will extend below selected range. Click OK. And we see the rewrapping now. It looks like it's running into the data below. That doesn't look so good. Let's do an undo, Control Z. Maybe what we should do is take this text and wrap it across this many cells. Bill, justify. Same message. Now it seems to fit okay. Now notice something else. So it looks like it clipped off the end of the sentence. This only handles about 255 characters. Please check with Harvey Morgan in the... We're not sure what it means. Let's do an undo, Control Z. And you can see there's a real limitation to this capability. So if the text is longer than what we're seeing here, in the accounting group for more background, we could probably remember that and add it to the text eventually, but do recognize that aspect of it. Now, suppose this entire set of data here were just put below right here for the moment. You might say, well, I think this would look better if we rewrap it across this number of cells and try it that way. Fill, justify, do it that way, same idea. In other words, what I'm suggesting here is you might want to experiment with this. In this case here, the data is now in C13, C14, and C15. You can see that up in the formula bar, and once again, we have lost some data in the process. So though it's got some limitations, I think you can see how you might use this. The other thing you might do here too, you might, for example, edit this last line. I'm just going to take off everything after Harvey Morgan here, put in a period and enter. And sometimes you say, well, I've got this data here. Why don't we rewrap this into, say, this many cells? Let's try it this way. Fill, justify. And actually I said rewrap, and that's not the exact term. It's called justify, but the concept of rewrapping is there. Extend below the range. So it's something worth experimenting with, and you see the different results here. It certainly is a lot easier than copying and pasting and editing, and sometimes you'd spend way too much time realigning this data in a way that is going to look best for you. It's called Fill, Justify. If you would like to insert a background image on a worksheet, it could be a photograph, it could be a company logo. You might want to do this for a display. You might want to do this for presentation reasons. It won't print. And your first place to look possibly would be the Insert tab in the ribbon, but it's not to be found there. It's on the Page Layout tab. Background. Now here's what a photograph might look like, and I think you'll say this probably is not the greatest choice. Nice picture and all that, but can you see the data all the time? And so only certain kinds of photographs are going to work here. I'm going to zoom back a little bit here too and scroll around. You'll notice that the picture starts to repeat after a while too, and there's a break right there. If you want to use this, you might want to experiment by zooming and also seeing where that break occurs. Let's delete the background. It's the reverse button. It says a toggle button. I'll delete background. Try something that might be a little bit more appropriate in a business type environment. Click this again. Here's a company logo. Now I think you're probably right if you were assuming this isn't going to look so good either, but let's give this a shot and see how that looks. Same idea in the sense that it's too obtrusive, but we've got other logos. Let's delete this. Try another one on these lines. This has a lot of white space in it, but once again, I think you can see here that probably overwhelms the numbers, can't see it that well. How about a more subtle background? This kind of a logo where the picture actually is gray, a dark gray. And now perhaps we've got something that's reasonable. Again, this is strictly visual, just for display reasons. It will not print. It adds a little flair perhaps to this worksheet. And if you're making a presentation, people might understand. You might also, when you do this too, go to the View tab and turn off the grid lines. That might help a little bit. But again, personal choice here. It's easy to add, easy to take off. Found on the Page Layout tab. Delete the background, and of course, just add the background from the beginning as you choose. Inserting and deleting rows and columns is another basic feature in Excel, and yet sometimes you might be spending more time than is necessary if you use in the cells group the insert command or the delete command. And again, nothing really wrong with these, but there are some faster techniques. Let's imagine that in this particular worksheet, we need a new column to the left of column C. The fastest way to do this is simply to right-click on column C and choose Insert to insert a new column to the left of the selected column. And similarly with rows, I need a new row above row 3. I'm going to right-click on the 3 and then choose Insert. Now, in the latter case here, I'm going to scroll rightward. You probably haven't seen this particular worksheet before, but I have, and it's up to me to know that what I just did probably wasn't the greatest idea here. And you can see what's happened. I inserted a new row in the data to the right. Now, worse things could have happened, and nothing really got deleted here, but that's probably not what one would want here. I'm going to press Ctrl Z. It's a reminder that sometimes we do want to insert cells. And by selecting these cells and then right-clicking within the selected area, we can choose Insert. This time, Insert has 3 dots behind it. So the appropriate action taken in this case, if we truly wanted to add a new record and not disrupt the data to the right, would be to shift cells down, click OK, and then nothing to the right has been changed. Now, what if I am not paying attention here and I've forgotten that I've got data to the right? And you can see the implications of what's going to happen if I delete row 3, but I'm just not paying attention. I'm going to right-click on row 3 and choose Delete. What kind of warning do I get from Excel? Nothing at all. And maybe too late I will discover this problem over here. Now, you could say, well, that data shouldn't have been on the worksheet anyway. Well, it is, and sometimes we have our needs and we forget where the data resides, and so deleting a row is something we want to at least think out and scope out within a given worksheet. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to undo this. And so the reverse of what we had done earlier is to select these cells and right-click. By the way, when you're doing this too, make sure you right-click within the selected cells. If we right-click on row number 3, the delete choice here doesn't have 3 dots, it simply deletes the entire row. So once we've selected these, do the right-clicking within the cells somewhere, and this time we see delete with 3 dots. And the action to be taken this time would be to shift the cells below it upward. Then we see how quickly that happens as well. Now, we might want to get rid of column C. Maybe we changed our mind about the need for it also. A keystroke way and not necessarily better, because it does mean switching from the mouse to the keyboard. But if we've selected column C, we can get rid of this column with Control-, and it's gone. And similarly, although no better than what we had done earlier with the right mouse button, if we need to add a new row down here, and there is no data to the right down here, but after we've clicked row 25, Control+ will insert a new row above that row. So different techniques here for inserting and deleting rows and columns. Now, we also from time to time might need a new worksheet within the workbook. And anytime we press Shift F11, we will get a new worksheet to the left of the current worksheet. So as you look at the bottom of the screen, we're currently using the sheet INSDEL row column. I'm going to press Shift F11. A new sheet appears to the left of that. Now, in Excel 2007 and in 2010, a new button is on the right-hand side, or let's say it follows the very last worksheet in the workbook, and there you'll see an icon. When you need to insert a worksheet after the last sheet, just click here, and we're about to see a new sheet after the sheet called Form. There it is. So different ways of inserting sheets, and prior to that, as we go back to this data, techniques for inserting and deleting columns and rows. But let's also point out that you might, from time to time, need to insert multiple rows. Now this might seem a little contrived here, but I want to put a new record above row 16. I also want to do this above row 21, so I'm holding down the Control key to select row 21. I might also need a new record above row 23. Once again, the Control key is held down. I'm going to click row 23. I want a new row above each of these, so I'll right-click and insert, and we get an empty row above each of these. And similarly, in a different situation, if you're trying to delete multiple rows, use the Control key to select multiple rows, and then right-click and delete. And if we need 2 columns between columns A and B, we can select columns B and C and then right-click Insert, and we get 2 columns to the left. And of course, the other data gets shoved off to the right. And so fast, easy ways without going into long menu sequences to insert and delete columns and rows. For any number of different reasons, you may want to hide one or more columns within a worksheet or rows. A typical example could be you are ready to print this worksheet and you're just a little bit cautious about printing social security numbers or depending upon where the printer might be located. Salaries, job ratings, that's confidential type information, so maybe some people need this list, but they don't need to see that information on paper. So we might hide a single or more columns. If we only want to hide a single column, fastest way is simply to right-click a column letter, for example, column D, and hide the column. And there will be no gaping hole in the print preview or on the paper as well. If we want to hide multiple columns, I'll undo this. Control Z, we might click a column D, and then using the Control key, select column J, possibly column F, possibly column K, as many as we want. Right-click and hide. The print preview, which you can get to quickly with Control F2, reveals that the information that we have hidden will not appear on the printed output. Fast and easy. It's a good idea too, when you open a workbook that you haven't seen in a while, or maybe you've never seen, always be to looking at those column letters to recognize that a column or two might be hidden. If your first thought here is column D is hidden, simply drag across the surrounding columns and take one of 2 actions. Right-click and unhide. I'm going to press Control Z to undo, or simply double-click the boundary between the 2, right here. So we can certainly bring back the data that way. Pressing Control Z again. If we see that there are many columns hidden, we want to bring them all back. Simply click in the upper left corner and then take either of those 2 actions. I'm just going to double-click between A and B on the boundary, and all the hidden columns have been returned. Similarly with rows, maybe this person has left the organization, but we want to leave the name here for a bit. And maybe there's another person down here as well, using the Control key and then right-click hide. Once again, we don't see the information there. Now, printing isn't the only reason that we want to hide, but it's a major one. And at other times, simply we want to see more data here. It's going to be simpler and easier for us to not deal with this data that often. We'll simply hide these columns and focus on the status and the higher data in the other columns here that are more important to us. So you have all kinds of different reasons for wanting to hide and unhide columns and rows. Now, you can also hide sheets. This particular workbook has some other sheets available. And let's imagine that I do need this data here for sales by date and time, but I don't use it very often. And I don't use the arrays very often, nor the form sheet. But yet I want them to stay here. So either right-clicking on one of these at a time, we can choose hide. We can do that. I've hidden that one. We don't see it anymore. The one called form. If you want to hide more than one, you can certainly use the Control key to select different sheets. Or if it's a consecutive series of sheets, you can use the Shift key. So I want to hide this arrays sheet as well as the sales by date and time. So I'm holding down the Control key and want to click on the other sheet, sales by date and time, and then right-click hide, and we'll hide 2 sheets at once. Now we have only 3 sheets visible. Now, at a glance, when you are looking at a workbook, you don't necessarily know, unless you were the person who had done the hiding, whether there are any hidden sheets or not, unless or until you right-click on any sheet tab. If unhide is selectable, then there are hidden sheets. Now, even though we can hide multiple sheets at once, we can only unhide 1 sheet at a time. So I've got 3 hidden sheets here. If I want to bring them all back, we just got to do them one at a time, if that's what we need to do. Sometimes, of course, we only want to bring back one of them. We can certainly do that too. Right-click, unhide. There we go. And next time we right-click, unhide is not selectable because we don't have any hidden. I don't think too many people use this feature, and it's not critical for most people, but it certainly is handy at times. Sometimes it just clears the air. You know, you want a simplified view of the number of sheets that you have, the ones you're most focused on. Hide the ones you don't really need, so it's fast and easy. And it should be something that you always check out when you're opening an unfamiliar workbook. Excel has an outlining capability that escapes the notice of many Excel users. It gives us the ability to quickly collapse and expand a display. This particular budget has tons of detail on it, perhaps too much detail for a coherent presentation, and it might make a lot of sense here to show just the quarters. Now you can do this manually, of course, and you could set it up ahead of time simply by dragging across columns B, C, and D using the Control key. Drag across these columns and these and these. Right-click and hide those columns. And sure enough, we see this information. However, what we don't have now is flexibility to quickly unhide. And particularly when we're making a presentation, we don't necessarily want our audience to see all the details, all the commands that we might use to expand and collapse this particular display. We might also want to collapse some of the display here vertically as well. We don't always necessarily want to see all the expense items here, maybe just the total expenses. We have the need sometimes to display just a portion of this, and we want a quick ability at our fingertips to do this without using standard Excel commands. Now, I'm going to undo what I just did here, go back to the original display, and suggest that in this worksheet where there are formulas in column E, for example here, that tabulate data from the left. Now, they don't have to be summed, although typically they are. These are adding up the totals. With these present here, and also with certain formulas, for example, in row 8, we're adding data from above. In row 14, we're doing the same thing. In row 15, we're subtracting them. The outlining capability in Excel will recognize these kinds of formulas and allow us to quickly set up an outline. Now, a smaller version of this kind of data is on a separate sheet here called Outline Data 2. Here too, we have that same characteristic use of formulas in certain columns. Here, for example, tabulating data from the left. Same thing over here. And although the need here wouldn't be quite as obvious, it's a good starting point for some people if you want to experiment with the outlining capability. A third possibility is done in a different way. This is a rather large list, some 700 rows or so. I just press Control down arrow, press Control up arrow. And in this data, you'll notice that it's sorted by department. What if we could insert subtotal rows here? Well, we can, and I'm going to do it very fast, simply by clicking on the subtotal button in the outline group on the data tab. And every time there's a change in the department here, I want to have totals for number of contacts, the 2010 sales, the 2011 sales, number of years here. And I'd like to have, after each department, some summaries. Click OK, and we do that. But what we've set up here is the outlining capability to quickly expand and collapse this. I'm going to click the 2. We've collapsed this to show only the subtotals. Now we're going to be doing the same things here and here as well. In this particular worksheet, however, without using the subtotal command on the Data tab, we have a choice called Group. It's also in the Outline group. Group, Auto Outline. Now you can do this manually, but I don't recommend it. I think Auto Outline is faster and better. Look what happens here. In other words, even though we're not clear what the symbols might mean, we recognize that Excel has figured out that these formulas tabulate data from the left, and we see the 2 up here. I'm going to click it, collapse the display to show only the quarterly totals. In that initial set of data in the outline data sheet, a more complex use of it here too. In the outline group, on the ribbon Data Group Auto Outline, and here too, we'll collapse this display. I'm going to click the 2 that we see up here. These are outlining symbols. So we can easily set up data, and this is not a rigged example. In fact, what you might even try, and I've tried this on an empty worksheet, and let's do it right now. I'm going to press Shift F11 to add a new worksheet, and just with a meager amount of data here, then it doesn't have to be 3, maybe it's 4 months. There's a value for first month, second month, third month, fourth month. I'm going to put a total right here. Simply from the Home tab, click Auto Sum, Enter, there we go. Could we create an outline out of this? Well, typically you wouldn't, but as a starting point, we sure can. Click on one of those cells, go to Data, Group, Auto Outline. See the same grouping that we saw before. The symbol 1 and 2 appear over on the left-hand side. We'll click the 1 to collapse this. Now, really, you wouldn't do this in real life, but it does illustrate the idea. The outlining capability is inherent in the fact that Excel sees the formulas tabulating data from the left. And if you've got data of a different nature that has totals on top, that's unusual. Not that unusual perhaps, but totals on the left are very unusual. You also have the ability, if you click the dialog box launcher for the outline group, if you have summary rows above, now I think this is strangely worded. Why doesn't it give us the option to say summary rows above? But by unchecking this, this would allow us to create an outline when we have summary rows on top of data. Or in the extremely rare case, at least I don't think I've ever seen it, where you've got summary columns to the left of detail. By unchecking these boxes, the outlining capability would work for those situations as well. So that's a rare use. I don't think most people would use this, but do recognize that that's there as well. So there are different kinds of data where you might want to use outlining. And this ability to collapse and expand, which we'll see in the next movie, is easy to set up, and we'll even show you different ways also for hiding those symbols when necessary. Once you have created an outline in a worksheet, you want to be able to quickly manipulate the display of columns and rows. And recognize that we have numbers on top of this worksheet, numbers 1, 2, and 3. Right now, the 2 has been clicked, and we see a collapsed view of the data. I'm going to click the 1, watch the display change here to show only this amount. Now, that's not very much. You probably wouldn't leave it looking like that very long, but you certainly could emphasize just the grand totals of all the entries. Clicking the 2 brings back more detail. Clicking the 3 brings back all the detail. Now, possibly you might want to go back to the display that shows just the quarterly totals, but during a discussion, someone might bring up the issue that last year, quarter 2 is a tough one. What's the detail? What's the breakout for quarter 2 here? And so we see the plus above quarter 2. We'll click it, and there is the detail, the April, May, June data for that particular quarter. And we can certainly do this for another quarter at the same time. If we wish, we could click the plus here for the fourth quarter and see the detail for those 2 quarters at the same time. And sure enough, the minus will collapse in any order that we want this display as well. So we can use outlining symbols here as well as outlining numbers. And in this particular list here, we have interim totals in row 8. We might want to collapse that to not show the sales shipping breakout to compact that part of it. Maybe we don't want the detail of rows 11, 12, 13 showing as well. We might collapse that part of it. So in different ways, you can expand and collapse the outline view. Notice that there are 4 outlining buttons along the left-hand side. It's because there's a different number of interim totals as we move down the worksheet vertically, compared with the number of totals that we saw working across the worksheet. I'm going to click 3. We see what's collapsed there, not a whole lot of change. Click the 2. Substantial change. Click 1, we're down to just this. If they're both 1, not very useful. So it's up to you to decide what's most useful in the display here as we look at the data. And again, a variety of choices. If it's also important at certain times to freeze the display to show more data, 2 things you could do. One is to press Control 8 to hide the outlining symbols and numbers. Control 8. And if you want to show even more data and hide the ribbon, you can double click on one of the ribbon tabs. I'm going to double click the word data, for example, collapses the ribbon. And there's even a third choice here. We can click the view tab and show full screen. That's even going to hide the ribbon. And the quick access toolbar to show even more information. So at different times, you have this need to display more information to collapse and hide. I'm going to press escape to bring back the less than full screen view. Double click one of the tabs here. It doesn't have to be data, but it could be. We're back here, and then Control 8 will bring back those outlining symbols, which at times, of course, you will want to have. They take up some space, but at the same time, you might want to hide them at different times. So anytime you do have an outline, you can quickly expand and collapse the view. If you need to redesign the data, or if you no longer want to have the outline feature in use as you make some adjustments here and there, the outline group on the data tab, ungroup has a choice, clear the outline. Great feature to use. It doesn't do any damage to your data. It might disorient you a little bit as you use it, but it's a great feature for quickly expanding and collapsing data. If you work with lists of data in Excel, whether they're large or small, you might want to explore a table creating capability. It's a feature that's been around since Excel 2007. In prior versions of Excel before 2007, there was a list feature, not very well implemented. But in 2007 and now in 2010, we have the table feature that allows us primarily to establish some visual features within this list makes it easier to read, gives us some filtering capability somewhat quickly. We can click on any cell here, and 3 ways to start this process are either the keystroke shortcut Control L, think of list, Control T, think of table, or on the Insert tab, table. In all 3 cases, we will next see this dialog box where Excel figures out all the contiguous data and assumes that's what we want to use in the table, and that would be correct. We click OK. If the list here that you are working with has empty rows in it and empty columns, you want to get rid of those. If you want this feature to include all the data, click OK, and the next choice, it may not be our choice really, but the next view shows every other row highlighted, and at the top of the screen, a new ribbon called Table Tools. Most important, a new tab called Design. And the thing that catches most people's eyes almost right away is the section to the right called Table Styles. You can certainly click on one of these. Notice as you slide over them, they change, but there's a drop arrow here revealing 61 different choices. And as you slide over these, you see what's happening. Strangely enough, some of these seem to be hiding your title order, like these down here. And these are guaranteed to use up a lot of the ink in your color printers if you ever do print this. But primarily, this is visual, and it does make the data more readable, particularly if it's, like in this example here, a lot of scientific data. Your eyes need to move left and right across the screen. The banded rows that we see make sense. So from time to time, you'll change your use of colors here and make the choice that way. Now, you'll recognize also that in this Design tab, often you'll see header row and banded rows selected automatically. I'm going to uncheck the banded rows. So we see the look now. Banded columns, well, possibly in some worksheets. I would suggest don't use both of these, although you can. I think it's going to make sense, use one or the other, probably banded rows. If we click last column, as I'm doing here, unless you're seeing it, you won't know what's happened until you look, but the last column is now bold, and sure enough, if we do this for first column, same thing will happen there. And it just offsets the data, and for some people, that's exactly what they want to do. Another obvious visual change here is that we do see filter arrows. You might not have used that capability, but it's easy to use. That's a handy thing to be able to have at your fingertips whenever you're working with lists of data. I might click column B here. First of all, make it a bit wider. SPC data here. I'm looking for those. There are just 5, so I want to unselect these. Contain just the ones that are equal to 5. It's an abbreviated list of the data. You see the row numbers off to the left-hand side. So you don't necessarily have to know a lot about filtering, but the filter arrows are there and it's handy. There are some analytical features associated with this. If, for example, we were to add a formula on the right-hand side, maybe that simply takes this data. We put in a title. First of all, look what happens when I put in the title here. I'm going to put in the index. And the index is simply, you see how the display changes automatically to include this column. The index is going to be 1.5 times the quantity here. So I'm going to take a formula equal this, and notice what's happening on the screen here, times 1.5. And look what happens when I press enter. Formulas are put into all of these cells at once. Now, again, the feature, although primarily visual, does have this analytical component to it. It uses different kinds of formulas here. We can also put totals on the bottom. It's a nice feature for displaying the data. And keep in mind, every time the active cell is within the data, you do see the Design tab. If I click outside, we don't see the Design tab anymore. If for whatever reason you decide that this feature doesn't offer you what you want, or it just doesn't grab you that much, you may want to remove the table capability. Now here's something else before you do this too that you might want to note. I'm scrolling downward, and where are the column letters? We don't see them within the table. They've been replaced by the text. I'm not sure the rationale behind that, and it doesn't necessarily disturb me, but at some point in using a table a couple of times, I said, which column am I in here now? I can see the address in the upper left-hand corner. That's column S, but I'm not seeing that here, unless I scroll all the way up top and then they re-emerge. So that's a little bit unusual. Now, if you decide you don't want this, possibly you'll just do a series of undos. We could do it that way. It might be too late to do that. So again, you can use undo repeatedly or click the drop arrow. Possibly go all the way back to create table. Undo that. That's one way to do it. Let me press Control Y to redo. The other way to remove would be to click the Design tab and then convert to range. Do you want to convert the table to a normal range? When you do this, however, if I say yes, the colors will stay. but the table characteristics and other respects are not there. And if we insert new rows here, we're not going to retain that every other row look as we would if we had the table in effect. I'm going to press Ctrl Z. Now there is a fourth way to create a table, almost the same idea, but you'll also see it in the ribbon, this time on the Home tab, Format as Table. And the only difference between this and the other three techniques is simply that the first step is the visual change that we make, and then we get the prompt for the range. Click OK. And if you then click in the data, we're in the same situation we're in before where we're making changes. So I think it's a feature well worth looking into. It's a nice quick visual look for some people who don't really like to do formatting manually, and it does offer some analytical capability, although primarily it's visual in nature. In this worksheet, you'd recognize almost immediately the shading in columns E, F, and G. What is a little unusual about it is that the text is white. Now you can certainly achieve this effect by going to two separate buttons in the font group on the Home tab. In no particular order, you might first put in a background color. Quite a few choices here. We could certainly do this manually. And then after having done that, the button to the right of it, pick a font color, possibly white. Now, that's not the way these cells were formatted. It's not to say that we couldn't have done that. But as I highlight these, I'm going to go into the Styles group on the Home tab and choose Cell Styles. Quite a few choices here, and you might recognize at the bottom here, right here, Accent 2. Well, it's not exactly a memorable name, but here we have some built-in choices. And Excel's live preview feature is kicking in, and as I'm sliding the mouse over these choices, we see immediately what's about to happen or what could happen in the worksheet. So this is going to save us some work, provided we like some of these choices here. And what's not so obvious is that the styles that we see here are also in sync with the term theme, which you might have heard about. In prior versions of Excel until 2007, there was no such thing as a theme, but in Excel 2007, themes and styles were introduced, and they have a complementary role to play. And as I'm sliding over the various choices here, you see how the data is reacting. Ignoring the emotional content of the words bad, good, and neutral, maybe these particular formatting capabilities here are exactly what we want. Now, which comes first here, the theme or the style? It's one of those chicken egg situations, but when we make a choice here, and maybe I'll go back to my original one, Accent 2, sort of a pinkish reddish color, I'll choose this. Excel also provides themes, and they're not located in the Styles group here. They're located on the Page Layout tab. I'm going to click Themes here, and as I slide over some of these choices, we see different colors appearing here. Now, what if I like one of these colors, and I say, okay, I like this variation possibly. That's called Aspect. I've changed the colors, but why would I do that? As I go back to the Home tab, and now click Cell Styles, we see similar yet different kinds of colors. Now, I might be looking around for a brighter green, a different green. How about those army type greens that we saw before? I don't see those anymore. So I'm going to go back, choose Page Layout again, go back to Themes. And what we're not seeing here just yet are all possibilities of the colors. And how many themes do we have? You'll see the term built in, and possibly you could go out on the web and find many more. If you're currently sliding on through your previews right now, you might see a different set here. Overlapping, what if we choose Metro? How has that changed things? Let's go back to the Home tab again, take a look at some of the cell styles. Here are colors we didn't see before, and where are those greens that had been in this column? They're not there anymore. There's a different kind of green over here. Now, you could easily lose a lot of time worrying about all these variations. Notice also how we can slide over currency here and percent. So this could be a bit bewildering because of all the choices that you have. What I'm going to do is do it the way I do it most of the time. I usually stick with the default theme. So on Page Layout, Themes, up at the top, Office. I'm not suggesting that's the way everybody should go because you're going to be deciding over time what works best for you. And the other aspect of this that isn't so obvious is that if you use Microsoft Word and you use PowerPoint, you will see the same themes. And there's a different worksheet down here called themes. And on purpose here, I'm using different kinds of colors in columns D through G, different kinds of style settings there. There's a chart on the screen. There's also a shape object placed here too. If I change the theme by clicking Page Layout and then Themes, as I slide over some of these choices, you see what's happening. 3 aspects of the screen are changing now. The data in columns D through G, the chart to the right, and the object, the shape below the data. Now, do we have time for this? That's another question without ridiculing the concept exactly. The choices seem to just go on and on and on. And I think in some cases, without editorializing exactly, some of these charts start to look pretty bad with some of these choices. And so you see the impact that choosing different themes has. But what if you're pulling together a project and you've got some files in PowerPoint and Word, and possibly you're working with other people as well? It would make good sense for you to come up with some kind of an agreement to say, okay, we are all going to use a certain particular theme that has a color set. You know, maybe you like Metro. I wouldn't pick that one ever. Look at that chart. It's terrible. How about Module? I like that one better, maybe. Maybe we'll click this. And what's happened? There's impact now, as we suggested earlier, on the styles that we have available. Click Home, Cell Styles, and we see the color choices here. So it's kind of hard to come up with some kind of a concluding statement about how you might use this. But the fact that there's so much variety and you need only slide over these to get a preview certainly makes a lot of choices easy to make, in the sense that it doesn't take long to make the choice. Agonizing over the differences is a different issue, but still, if that's the one you like, good, we'll keep it that way. I'm going to improve this one possibly. Same idea. Maybe I like that. There we go. But again, recognize that when you change themes, it has impact on the styles that you've chosen in cells, also the colors that exist in charts, and if you have any objects, the colors that are being used there as well. So work back and forth, going to Page Layout, choosing themes, and then using the Home tab to get into some of the style choices. And another aspect of this too that you will probably want to explore, on the Page Layout tab next to Themes, you will see different colors displayed this way. And you can slide over these choices as well. It's another approach to it. Again, keeping your eye on the various color palettes that are exposed here. So no shortage of capabilities for exploring the various themes that work with styles in Excel. On the Insert tab in the ribbon, you'll notice a choice called Shapes. If you click the arrow for Shapes, you'll see almost 200 different kinds of shapes, including lines, a variety of rectangles, some basic shapes. It includes smiley face in here, a lot of block arrows, some flowchart symbols, a lot of stars and banners. How about a 16-point, 32-point star? Lots of choices down here. Many of these, particularly those that encompass space, possibly could be used for titles. Now, of course, a lot of them wouldn't be that appropriate, but if you want to put a title on a worksheet, you could encompass it in one of these. You might want to put an arrow that points to a cell for particular emphasis. You want to annotate a worksheet. So there are lots of different reasons for using these, and you'll find these in PowerPoint as well. And many people use these more there perhaps than they might in Excel. Suppose you want to create one of these. I might want to put a title. Let's first just talk about the basic idea of how we draw one of these shapes. I'll choose a rectangle for starters. You'll see the crosshairs. I can put it anywhere I want. Maybe I want to put it over here. As I'm dragging this, it could be a tall rectangle. It could be a wide rectangle. If you hold down the Shift key, it will become a perfect square, provided you let go of the mouse first. As I'm doing, there we are, a square knife. Maybe I didn't really need a square, but just emphasize the idea. Recognize also that when you create a shape, there's a new ribbon called Drawing Tools with a Format tab on it. And tons of options here, from changing the appearance of that object. If we want to create another one, the left-hand side of this tab does have the options available here from the drop-down. So here we are again. Let's suppose we want to put a title in here. Maybe I'll use a rounded rectangle and draw it over here. And once you have created this, you can begin typing immediately. So maybe I want to put in a phrase here, domestic sales. It's going to be the title for this particular worksheet, domestic sales dash 2011. Text could be a lot bigger. Let's just jump to the home tab here. I'll choose a bigger font. And we might center it with this button here, possibly change the font color. If you want it red, that probably isn't a great choice there, but you can manipulate that, of course, pretty easily too. Make it be bold, so on, all the different things that we might do with the shape. If you'd like to draw an arrow, we can go back to the Insert tab, Shapes, here's an arrow. And when you draw an arrow, you might want to point to a certain cell. In a different situation, if you're trying to draw an arrow or a line, if it needs to be perfectly horizontal, rather than guessing, hold down the Shift key. So when you are holding down the Shift key here on arrows, you can draw this in 45-degree increments, so perfectly vertical or horizontal, or the 45-degree angles in here too. You will let go of the mouse first if you want to retain that angle for whatever reason. And possibly you're going to accompany this with a box. If you drag the edge of this, you can associate it with the box there. So there are lots of different things we can do with these. And going back here, if you wanted to draw, for whatever reason, smiley face, you'll recognize this. It could be wide or tall. You might also recognize here that there's a yellow diamond, and you will see this on certain shapes. So smiley face there may be looking like it's Friday. We'll drag the yellow diamond, so it looks like Monday, doesn't it? A little more meaningful use of that might be insert shapes. For whatever reason, you've drawn a hexagon or an octagon. Maybe some text is going to go into it. You made it wide or tall. The yellow diamond here changes the shape of it as well. If you're going to create a flowchart, you might recognize that there are some flowcharting symbols there. Under shapes, you can use those, or you can certainly use other boxes and triangles and diamonds as you wish here. If you do intend on creating a shape a multiple number of times, you can also choose an option here under shapes. You can also choose to right-click a shape. If I need a few triangles here, I'm going to right-click the shape and lock drawing mode. And what that means is I can create a triangle there, I can create a triangle here, create one there, and on and on and on if I need a few of them. And at some point, I don't need them anymore, I could press escape. If you'd like to duplicate a shape, you can click on it and simply press Ctrl D. Press it a few times if you want a few more of this to create multiple shapes. So they're easy to create, and although it may seem a little bit like fun and games here and there, it also can be used for annotation purposes, for example, drawing arrows, putting titles on worksheets, and possibly building flowcharts. It's highly unlikely you would ever see a worksheet looking like this one, but it does encompass some shapes that you might use here and there. And it is worth noting that the shapes can be manipulated fairly easily. You'll also notice that some of these shapes have reflections. The one on the left here, the oval, 2 trees, olive oil, there's a reflection below it. The octagon here has a shadow behind it. You can actually use both together. The rounded rectangle to the right here has a feature called glow on it. So we want to show you different ways to manipulate and add these features. Here's also a line. We might want to make a change there, make it thicker. So, starting with the oval on the left-hand side here, I'm going to click the oval, and because it is an object, recognize again the Drawing Tools ribbon is activated. We've got the Format tab here, and under Shape Effects, a drop arrow, Shadow. There's no shadow currently being used. Let's ignore that feature for the moment. How about Reflection? Right now, out of the 9 choices available, the one in the lower right is being used. And the so-called Live Preview feature allows us to slide over the other choices and see the subtle variation here. If we'd like to use Reflection, fast and easy, or no reflection, easily make the changes. We will use this reflection instead. There's a shadow here. Let's click this object, go to Shape Effects. And when we come to shadow, we see which one is being used. It's the one at the bottom here. But as we slide over the other choices, and recognize from time to time you might want to move an object because we're not necessarily seeing the effect so well, since these choices overlap the object in question. So maybe what we'll do here is scroll rightward, moving that octagon to the left side. It's still selected. Choose shapes this way, and then maybe explore, if we're interested, some of those shadow effects. Tons of options here, from making changes to the way these objects have shadows on them if that's what we're interested in. quite a few choices. On a line, perhaps you want that thicker. The approach to formatting either involves right-clicking, and sometimes you'll get this option, but if you right-click again on the object, you're more likely to see a larger menu, and you will see some options in the mini toolbar that might be appropriate. For example, shape outline here. That will give us options for weight. How about a thicker line? We could go down this path, or come back there again, right-click. Another approach could be, how about format shape? And that activates a totally different dialog box. There's certainly some options to explore here. Way too many, let's say, for the moment. And sure enough, the Format tab in the Drawing Tools ribbon also gives us some capability here for controlling maybe the length of the line, the angle. You can manipulate these. So there's just many, many different ways to explore how these options are appearing. This particular object here has glow on it. Let's click there, go to Shape Effects. Well, there are 24 options down there for applying glow. Once again, the choices here are overlapping. We can still see a corner of it, so if that's something we think we'd like, fine, make those choices as well too. And when it comes to the size of a shape or the ratio of height to width, sometimes you want to make a shape larger or smaller. If you drag a shape from the corner, you could certainly make this shape, for example, wider, taller, whatever, or smaller in a variety of ways. If you hold down the Shift key, you are making it larger or smaller using the same aspect ratio. It's the ratio of height to width. Sometimes you want to do that. When you are using the Shift key in these circumstances, be sure to let go of the mouse first if you want to retain that look. There are other times when you've chosen the shape and you want to make it larger, but you want to keep it around the same center. Maybe I'll move this downward. How do we move a shape? Simply click and drag it. If we'd like to make a copy of it, we can hold down the Control key and drag it anywhere we want. If we'd like to have a copy of it in the same horizontal or vertical plane, we'll be holding down Control and Shift. And so as I drag rightward here, I can't drag it upward. There we go, but if I do want a copy of this upward, I'll hold down Control and Shift and drag it upward. It's not letting me drag it left or right. Don't really need that now, so Control Z. If we'd like to make this shape larger or smaller around the same center, we want to drag any of the corners with the Control key to do this. Larger, smaller, same center. If we want to make it wider or narrower around the same center, we're going to drag either handle on the left or right side, holding down the Control key, larger, smaller this way, or above, larger, smaller this way. If we'd like to rotate the object, we can drag this green circle in a variety of ways. If we hold down the Shift key, it only lets us drag this in 15-degree increments. I'm holding down Shift right now. So for a variety of reasons, in methods and techniques, we can rotate objects as well. If you double-click an object, it activates the Format tab if it had not been activated. There's so many different options here, so many different choices. And a reminder again, a shape like this, maybe you don't like the color, what might you do? Click Shape Fill is one option, pick a different color, and as we slide over these, we see the choices. If you don't see a color you like here, you might find it down here, or how about other colors, more fill colors? On and on and on, maybe out this way. Pick green, possibly here we don't get live preview. Click OK, we will see the effect. If you don't like the edge there, maybe it's the shape outline you'd like to change. And immediately you see what's happening there. So I think many, many times, if you've worked with graphics features before, a lot of the way we use these in Excel is fairly obvious, but it's definitely worth exploring. It's not all fun and games. These arrows could be used in an important way. If you did have data in a cell, maybe imagine this value. It's pretty important. You've got it with some other data. We might want to point to this. Would you like to put an oval around it? We could go back to the Insert tab, Shape, let's find an oval. Drag it roughly there, move this around a little bit. Now obviously we'd like to see through the oval. So once again, what might we do? Shape Fill, No Fill. We want the edge. So just on and on, we could make that thicker, of course. We could also make it translucent. quite a few different ways to make changes here. Here's another object. I don't know that I've ever used this in any intelligent way. Look at all the yellow diamonds there that will allow us to change the relative relationship of the arrows to the box in the background. Just goes on and on and on in terms of what we might do here. Again, as you select an object, whether it's a line or an object, we have a variety of choices available on the Format tab, and a lot of them are available also by right-clicking. Excel 2010 has a new visual feature called Spark Lines. You'll find these on the Insert tab, Line Column Win-Loss Spark Lines. These are like in-cell charts. And rather than creating a full-fledged chart, it would be very handy if we could have, for example, in this cell here, some measure of what's happening in these cells. Now we can certainly see the numbers, but the visuals sometimes help us tell the story quickly. And similarly, we'd like to have the same kind of chart here, here, and here in this particular example. So let's highlight this data to begin with. You can highlight the data ahead of time or highlight the receiving area first. Either way doesn't make any difference. Let's highlight the sending area, so to speak, or the source data, and then choose line, column, or win-loss. Let's pick line first. Choose the data you want. We've done that. Where do we want the spark lines to be placed? We can put these anywhere we want. Below the data to the right of it, it's going to make sense here to simply put it in these cells out here. That you don't really have to collapse the dialog box. As long as those cells are visible, go highlight them. There we are. Okay. And we see a line chart. And as you look at this at first, you say, well, yeah, but there's no reference point necessarily. And are these to scale or what? By looking at the numbers and jumping back and forth at the image, you can begin to see what's happening here. It is a reflection of the ebb and flow of the data moving up and down. I think that for many people, we're going to need to alter these to make them even clearer. And when you do click on one of these, recognize that even though we haven't selected all of them, we do have some tools available. A new ribbon called Sparkline Tools. First thing that might catch your eye is the design possible. Click here and make a different choice, a different set of display colors there. About red, maybe that looks better. Notice how they all change at once. In other words, we didn't necessarily have to do this to make the change. That's certainly one change. And the sparkline color here also gives us the option of making these thicker, and I think that's important in some situations. How about this one here? That's a lot more prominent than it had been. But there are some other tools as well. Let's choose axis here. We might want to show an axis. Now this isn't obvious until we actually do it, which you'll see the difference there. I think in some situations that's going to make some sense. We do see that some data has gone below the axis, meaning below 0. So we see some negative numbers over there. But even more helpful is probably going to be those choices available in the Show group on the Design tab. How about showing the high point? You see what's happened here? The high point as a particular marker associated with it. How about low point? Well, same kind of marker. Well, it's pretty obvious which is low and which is high, but to distinguish the two, we might want to choose marker color here over in the Style group. And maybe for the high point, we want that to be blue and keep the low point red, since red is often associated with negative data. Back to the Show group on the left-hand side here, negative points, we could highlight those. And there's a few negatives that aren't necessarily the low points, so you might want to kick these around a little bit and see the variations there. The first point, possibly. Or how about markers for all? Could do it that way. That too might have its merits, so you might want to explore some possibilities here with different kinds of markers and negative points. I'm going to turn off negative points. Sometimes that's the display. Turn off high point. Maybe that's the one you want. Is it obvious that we always want a line chart? How about a column chart? So in the type group here, we might choose column and get those kinds of entries. Another possibility here is to take this same data and have spark lines appear below it. In other words, how about a chart here that reflects this data and a chart here that reflects these? So let's put spark lines here. And this time for variation, I'll highlight the receiving area first, the area where we wish the spark lines to appear. And from there, on the Insert tab, and maybe this time we'll choose column. Click right here. Same dialog box we saw before, but this time we're going to fill in the source data. And no real reason to collapse this, simply go select the data and click OK. and we have charts down there. Now, what's a little confusing about this at first is you have to kind of recognize that, say in this example here, as we see the columns from left to right, we're seeing this data here. So maybe you think of that being rotated somehow. And here too, with this kind of sparkline entry, we might want to go back to the Design tab and consider some axis changes here. How about showing the axis? That might be helpful. And also here, choosing same for all sparklines for the minimum and also for the maximum. And that puts them on the same relative plane in terms of their values. To me, this isn't as valuable as what we've seen on the right-hand side, but nevertheless, it has its merit, and it wouldn't necessarily suggest that you need to do both at the same time. Another variation on this could be you simply want to show a relative, and this might be more appropriate with slightly different kinds of data, but the third kind of sparkline is called win-loss. I'm going to choose that here, and you see what happens. In the example here, the negatives are interpreted as a loss, and so they appear below the bar. So at a glance, we could say, well, only in August did we have 2 of these below 0. And you can certainly see it in the data, but maybe this is a little clearer here. Now, one other variation here that you might be interested in, suppose we would like to see this kind of a chart, maybe as a line chart, but below the data. I'm going to copy this simply by holding down a Control key, dragging an edge down to here, letting go of the mouse, and this time I want to create some sparklines and initially put them right here, which doesn't sound right. So I might start at this location, click Insert. Let's put in line sparklines, and the source data is this here. Click OK. And although it actually does what we want in one sense, it certainly isn't what we want ultimately. In other words, this truly is a representation of these values. But what if we were to merge this cell with the ones to the right? Now, if we want to do this for all these cells below it, we'll have to now hold down the Control key, drag across here, Control key still held down, drag across here, and then merge these cells on the Home tab, merge and center. There we are, make the lines thicker. We now have a visual representation of what happened in the East across those 12 months. If you want to get rid of sparklines, you could get rid of any one, although you're more likely to want to get rid of all of them. But if for whatever reason you had a situation where you say, well, I don't want to show that yet because the December data isn't final, you don't delete, you right-click and choose sparklines. And say if you just wanted to get rid of one of them, it would be Clear Selected Sparklines. If you want to get rid of the whole group, you could right-click on any one of them and simply choose Sparklines, Clear Selected Sparkline Group. So here and there, of course, you want to get rid of these. So room for a lot of experimentation here as we insert these. And again, the basic idea, as you can see, is to give us a quick visual read on data by putting in effect a chart into a cell by way of sparklines. For either display or presentation purposes or even printing purposes, you may want to alter this worksheet by including some pictures, and you might even want to change that dynamic chart into a picture. On the Insert tab in the ribbon, you'll see the choice Picture. And in this particular folder, I've got some photographs. So I've got some logo type photographs and actual logo here. Let's just start with a picture. Perhaps it's the picture of the vineyard. We'll click Insert, and nearly always it goes to a position that we don't want it to be in. We can drag these usually simply by clicking and dragging. And for resizing, we can drag the corners to change the location of 2 of the edges or drag the side. This, however, does distort the image, and it's better to get in the habit of dragging just the corners because they automatically get adjusted at the same aspect ratio. If you work with shapes in Excel or clipart, same basic technique, you'd like to position this in such a way that it makes sense to you. Make it larger, smaller, typically by dragging the corners. Eventually, we will want to put a border on there as well. Let's also insert a logo. Insert now in this case, it is a picture also. Many people and many organizations have an official company logo. We can actually double click this to pop it right there, move it around a little bit. I doubt if you want to rotate it, but you could certainly do that as well. Maybe that's not such a good idea. Control Z. If you are rotating, by the way, hold down the Shift key if you somehow insisted that that need to be at a certain angle, because it does allow you to rotate in 15-degree angles. Now, a less likely choice for a picture, and this certainly is not a picture right now, this is a dynamic chart. It does reflect the data. If the data is changing, this chart changes. For example, if I change the 84 here, that's the East January sales. If I make that be 200, imagine maybe that's really a typo, but as I press enter, watch the chart. The data is in sync with the chart. Now, perhaps the data is frozen. Maybe the data is history, it's not going to change anymore. We don't need this chart to be dynamic. There are some advantages to turning it into a picture. The way we get there is not so obvious, but it's pretty easy. Let's simply click the chart, then right-click, copy, and we don't want to destroy this. We'll leave it right here for the moment. Either below this or to the right, click in a cell, and then on the Home tab, choose the arrow under Paste, and then paste this as a picture. It looks almost the same as the chart. I'm going to zoom back a little bit here with the Control key and the mouse. What's the difference? The chart is still dynamic, but we don't need that feature anymore. Notice when we do click on the chart too, that we do have chart tools, design, layout, and format choices. We're not going to be needing those anymore here. Let's finally get rid of this chart. Clicked on it, we'll just press delete. This chart is a picture. And recognize now that instead of seeing those three tabs for live charts, we've got a format tab here. So this is a picture in the same sense that our logo is right here. And notice there we see that same tab in the ribbon, and on the picture over here, the same idea there as well. So we now have three pictures here, and they have something in common in the sense that as we manipulate them, they're all treated the same. They are all pictures, and there are quite a variety of things we will want to do with these pictures once we have them here. In this worksheet, we see a photograph, a logo, and a chart as a picture. They're all considered pictures. If I click the picture below the data here, recognize that in the ribbon, we see the Picture Tools ribbon and Format, and we have these choices. If I click on the logo, we have those same choices, and if I click on this chart, which is really a picture, we have the same choices. Although there are tons of different features to explore here, the one that's most critical is what we call Picture Styles. Use this on the photograph first. Picture Styles is located on the Format tab in the Picture Tools ribbon. Remember, this is active only when you have selected a picture. And the key button here is the drop arrow right here, which reveals 28 variations. Live preview is in effect. As we slide over these choices here, we see quite a few variations. Some of the borders on these, particularly the one up in the upper right at first, is now overlapping the data, so we might actually like that look, but we are going to have to move the photograph. So you can see these pretty readily and see what's happening here and decide what looks best. Notice that on some of these too, we will also see shadows. We'll see tilting like here. Notice the shadow behind the lower right-hand corner of that. And here you can barely see it, but there's a shadow off to the left-hand side. This slants the image with a little shadow underneath, and so on. Certainly some of these options might be appropriate for photographs and not necessarily for logos, which are, in a certain sense, things we want to be a little bit careful with in terms of manipulating them. So one way or another, we find something we like here. Maybe this one, maybe that one, make a choice. There we go. And for logo, something similar perhaps, although I want to be a little bit careful. There's hard and strict rules about how logos are used in some companies. Maybe this is okay, maybe not, but you can make your choice there as well too. And for a chart, same general idea. This is a chart as a picture though, not a regular chart. With standard Excel charts, you don't have these options. And here too, you might want to explore some of these. This could possibly be part of a presentation we're doing with PowerPoint, so you can imagine a variety of choices here that are going to fit your particular needs. The ones that clip off the corners may be not so good for charts, but again, it's your call. So the Styles feature has a lot of visual appeal. Then we can apply them as we've done here to a chart picture, to a picture that's a logo, and to a picture that's an actual photograph. In this worksheet, we're seeing three different kinds of pictures: a photograph just below the data, a logo just to the right of it, and a picture of a chart that has been converted into a picture. And in all cases, styles have been applied. Remember, when you double click on a picture, it does activate the Picture Tools ribbon and the Format tab. And we might want to consider the look of the borders here. Possibly on the border for this chart here, Click the drop arrow here for picture border. We might want to change this to be dashes possibly. You see the effect immediately with live preview here, possibly this one. I doubt if that's a great choice for most people. While we're here, we might also want to change the weight or the thickness of the line, maybe a thinner line, thinner than one we've selected earlier perhaps. Got some choices there as well. I think on the photograph in the lower left-hand corner, we definitely want to consider that as well. The white sky there seems to blend into the worksheet, so here too, and in no particular order, maybe we want to change the weight of a border. Now it's a simple line. We might want to make it dashed or not, maybe a subtle dash like this, maybe, and possibly come back again, change the color of that as appropriate. Again, fairly self-explanatory. One should try a few of these. Logo, maybe we don't need to make a change there, so border effects are certainly available. We also have picture effects here too. Would this look better if we had shadows on them? And the number of choices here just gets overwhelming at times if you let it become overwhelming. I think many times you don't need to use some of these. A reflection might be kind of a cool feature that you like. And as you slide over some of the variations of how about that logo right now? It's got a reflection under it. Here's a different kind of reflection that goes deeper. And it's right next to the logo. How about sliding down, move the reflection away from it? He just didn't know you had that many choices. How does that look with a photograph? Possibly. Back to picture effects, consider reflection. How about glow? That's another one. Picture effects, maybe we'll try it on the chart here. Glow. Surround the image with a glow color. Lots of capabilities. And in addition to these here, under the styles section, we also have corrections here and sharpen and soften the focus. Now, for many people, that's not a great choice, but here and there, it gives it a certain kind of artistic flair that you might like. Brightness and contrast as well. The key idea here is not to remember the names of these, but just to slide over the choice and see how it looks to you and whether you think that would be appropriate in this given worksheet. And there's some color choices as well here too. And we look at some of these here. How's that for a choice? Maybe, maybe not. And a new feature in Excel 2010, artistic effects. And once again, we might be hard-pressed to justify why we would use some of these, but here and there, it does have that look that appeals to you and might make sense in a given worksheet, either for presentation or printing purposes. Tons of choices available here on the Format tab when we work with pictures. In this worksheet, in column H, conditional formatting is in effect. Those performance ratings that are 5 have a pink background and red font, and nothing wrong with that. But what if you'd like to highlight the entire row when that occurs? In other words, all of the data for Nathaniel Nicholas here and all the data for Eric Pratt and so on. Let's select all of the columns, all of the relevant columns first. Now, we can alter the existing rule or we can get rid of it. It might be best first simply to get rid of this. So as we approach conditional formatting, and maybe we have no other conditional formatting rules in effect, we might just clear the rules here from the entire sheet. And now let's revisit conditional formatting and set up a new rule. We want to use a formula to determine which cells to format. Now the formula is not going to be an obvious one, but once you see a few of these, you'll be able to create your own. Equal H1. Now H1 doesn't even have a performance rating in it, it's text. When you select this, you'll see dollar signs. Now H1, think of it as a surrogate or a substitute for all cells in the selection. Whenever the column H entry has a 5 in it, we want to apply a format. So by pressing the function key F4 or manually manipulating these dollar signs, we want the dollar sign in front of the H but not in front of the 1. And now we indicate equal 5. For every single row here, every time the column H entry is equal to 5, we want to apply a format. Maybe we'll just make a yellow background for the moment. Click OK, click OK, and we see what's happened. And as you might expect, if this rating becomes a 4, we'll lose the highlighting there. This becomes a 5 in the second example here. That becomes highlighted. And of course, you can choose your own color scheme there. Once again, by selecting these cells here and choosing conditional formatting, we can come back and revisit the rule. We can manage the rules. We can see them again, edit the rule if we need to. We don't need to in this case, but there's the rule. So you can use formulas in creating conditional formatting. Another example here is in this same worksheet, and this probably in a real life situation would be in a different worksheet, but let's focus on just this data here. And based on what's going on here, we want to know when the shipping date is more than 5 days after the order date. We've decided that everything should be shipped within 5 days. If it's not, and it certainly hasn't been in all cases, we want these dates to stand out a little more prominently. So in our logic here, we are going to be comparing the entries in column M with the entries in column L. So let's select column M, conditional formatting, a new rule here. Use a format to determine which cells to format. Here too, not so obvious, but once we see it, it's going to make perfect sense. Equal M1. Now we don't want this to be absolute. I'll press F4 repeatedly, so I probably could have typed this just as fast. Greater than L1. This time we'll just type it. Now, if we're only looking for those situations where the column M entry is more than 5 days, we want this to read equal M1 greater than L1 plus 5. So if it's more than 5 days, we want to apply a format here that we use red or something. There we go. Click OK. Any kind of formatting feature you wish, of course. Click OK. And all those entries in column M where the shipping date is more than 5 days after the order date are standing out. Looks like we've got quite a few here, and you can quickly do the math in your head and see what's going on. And that too, as you would expect with conditional formatting, is dynamic. If a mistake was made on one of these shipping dates here, and this really was the 12th, now that is 5 days, but it's not more than 5 days. As soon as I press enter here, that no longer will retain that color. And one more aspect of conditional formatting, if you are looking at a worksheet that you haven't seen in a long time or maybe never, and you see colors, you suspect that there probably are some conditional formatting rules here and there. On the Home tab, and in the Editing group extreme right, click Find and select if you'd like to track down where conditional formatting exists. You can go to the choice Conditional Formatting. Now, unfortunately, with a lot of color schemes going on, this might throw you a little bit. It looks like there's conditional formatting here. This is all highlighted. That doesn't tell you what the rule is, but at least you know that it's there. And column M is highlighted as well. So you still might have to do some more sleuthing to figure this out. But if you click on a given cell here, or in this case, you probably would click column M, but even if you click on a cell here, you might say, well, how'd that get there? What happens sometimes, people will see a red cell like this. They'll go to the Home tab, go to the Fill Color bucket and say, well, I want that to be no fill, or blue or green or something. They'll make a choice here and nothing happens at all. So what do we do here? If we simply click on one of these cells and go to Conditional Formatting and manage the rules, we can see what rule is in effect there. And that helps us figure things out as well too. So there's no question that conditional formatting has some real dynamic aspects of it. And previously in this movie, we saw 2 different examples of how to use formulas to build conditional formatting rules. If you want to print this worksheet, it might be more readable, or you might like the visual effect of not seeing the department names being repeated. In other words, let's have only the first occurrence. So manually, we could certainly come along and get rid of these subsequent ADCs here, do the same thing with admin training. But how long is this going to take? Quite a while. There's a formatting tip. It's actually a trick that will do this much, much faster. And it's based on the idea that we can insert logic that in effect will allow us to compare each cell here with the cell above it using conditional formatting. Now, after clicking column A, let's go to conditional formatting and establish a rule. Use a format to determine which cells to format. Equal A1, don't really have to capitalize it. Equal, now what is the cell above A1? Strangely enough, it's the very last cell in the worksheet. And if you look outside this dialog box just for the moment, over in cell I1, I put in the total number of rows in an Excel worksheet, 1,048,576. So if cell A1 is equal to the one above it, and that's A1048576, if any of these cells in column A is equal to the one above it, that means it's a duplicate, then we want to use a format that doesn't show the text entry. And what we're going to be doing here is changing the format. Now we're not really changing the data, but we're going to make the font be white. So stating this over again in English, if any cell in column A is the same as the cell above it, make its font be white. We'll click OK. Now, while they're selected, you can see that the names are still there, the entries are still there. Click outside of this and on the printed page, and I'm just going to jump into print preview with Control F2. You'll see how it will look on the printed page. In other words, we don't see the recurring titles. And for many people, that's a lot easier and simpler to read. By the way, when you press Control F2 to get a print preview, you can't immediately jump back into the worksheet environment with Escape. There we are. So the data is still here. You can certainly see it in the formula bar, and if you highlight the data, you can see the text following through. We haven't destroyed it. We've simply changed the font to be white for printing purposes. Although this worksheet might be ideally set up for printing, recognize that in column A, recurring department names don't exist here, so it's easier to read when it's on the printed page. However, if we sort this data, say by years, contract, sales, or any column, we have lost potential information in column A and we can't put the data back together again. And so what we need to do sometimes is actually fill in this information here with ADC and all this information here with the phrase admin training and so on and so on. This is based, by the way, on a real life situation of a few years ago where a company that I was working with got data from their Thailand office frequently like this, and they needed to fill in those blank cells in column A. Now it's based on a simple little concept that you might have encountered in your other use of Excel. Some scattered data out here in columns J, K, and L. Maybe in each case here. Now, none of these are labeled or anything, so it's somewhat academic. But in this cell here, I'd like to subtract the two cells above it. I want to do the same thing here and the same thing here. So we can select different cells at the same time by using the Control key in no particular order. This cell is selected. I'm going to hold down Control and click here, and hold down Control and click here. And I'm writing a formula now for cell J4 equal J2 minus J3. And rather than pressing Enter, I'm going to press Control Enter. So what have I done? I put the same relative formula in all three cells. This subtracts the two cells above it. So does this. So does this. Now, with that thought in mind, let's take a look at column A and start off by using a feature not so obvious. We would like to eventually put formulas in each of these cells here that get data from the cells above. But how do we select just the blank cells? After clicking column A, on the Home tab, the extreme rightmost group called Editing has a feature called Find and Select. And the least obvious choice here, perhaps, Go to Special. And here is a choice called Blanks. Click OK. It's selecting the blank cells only. For the moment, A3 is the active cell. So I'm going to write a formula here, equal, up arrow, in other words, A2, and I'm going to press Enter if I only wanted to put it into that cell, but all the other blank cells that have been highlighted, I want the same kind of formula. In other words, I want every one of these blank cells to have the same formula as the one above it, so I'm going to press Control Enter. And there we see how they're all filled in. But they're all formulas, so there's one more step we need to take here. Click column A, and we can do this in a number of different ways, but we simply want to copy this data and paste it as values. And you can do this very fast simply by taking the right edge and hold down the right mouse button, drag it temporarily into column B, and then right back on top of itself. Let go, copy here as values only. So we've cleaned up the data, it's now readable. Along the way, we could have done some special formatting as well, but we now have the data in shape. It's the reverse of what we had done in the previous movie, but now the data is useful, it can be sorted, and we can come back and actually print it if we wanted to and hide the data or turn the fonts into white font as we did in the previous movie. In this worksheet, the entries in column B and in column C are in the millions, and that's certainly appropriate for the data at hand. But there are times when you might want to display numbers of this magnitude as decimals. And one approach certainly would be to write formulas in adjacent cells and then redisplay these. Suppose, for example, on populations, if you did know the population of California as you see it here, you might say it as 37 million or possibly 37.1 million. Dexis has 24.8 million. That's commonly used. When you're dealing with dollar figures, perhaps similarly, that's what, 4.3 million. Whether it's millions or thousands or billions, you may want to display this data in a decimal way without using formulas. Let's just highlight a few cells here. We'll do it with the sales for starters here. Let's display these as millions. Right-click Format Cells, one of the many ways we can get into this dialog box. And the not-so-obvious way to do this is to create a custom format. Usually this process can be simplified if we click the number category first, then click Custom. Now, we don't need to know all the details about custom formatting. What I would suggest we do here is simply use an existing format, modify it, and make sure it ends with 0.0, and then the unusual step here of putting in 2 commas. If we put in 1 comma, we will be displaying this as thousands, 2 commas as millions. So each comma will suppress the display of 3 characters to the left of the decimal. There we go. This is 4.3 million, that's the way we would say it. Now, obviously, if we're going to do this for the entire column, eventually we'd want to change our heading to make sure it's clear to everybody. But the other important aspect of this is, as we click on cell C3, look in the formula bar, or if you happen to double click, the value hasn't really been changed at all. It's all about the display. And once again, that format, right-click, Format Cells, an easy way to get there. We see what it is now, a custom format that ends in comma, comma. If it somehow makes sense to you to show these in thousands, then we want to show only 1 trailing comma, and it would look like this. But certainly we wouldn't have them mixed together, and you'll decide how to label them. So it does make more complex number-laden worksheets easier to read, but with proper identification it would make sense. Maybe in column B here we'll do all these at once. Click right here. Now we've already created this one custom format. So by right-clicking, going into Format Cells here, we can go right into Custom, and we'll probably see it at the bottom of the list there. There it is right there. Click OK. And again, we probably should adjust the title to say in millions. So it certainly makes the worksheet easier to read and handle. But remember, the pure value is there. We're simply using a common way to display this, using that unusual custom format. In accounting type worksheets, there are times when you might want to put in 2 titles in the same cell. We might want to have a title for our regions here, as well as a title for these reporting dates or sale dates, whatever they might be. So I'm going to type reporting date. I might want to change the size of that font eventually, pressing Alt-Enter, and in the same cell I want to put in region. Press Enter. And that's not exactly very clear as to what's going on here. But we can do something that has the unofficial name of elbow formatting. First of all, what we might do is highlight these cells and then make sure they appear in the top of the cell. And then, possibly making column A wider, we like to put in a diagonal here. So let's do that with a border feature. So we could do this in a couple of different ways. One way might be to right-click and go to Format Cells, or simply click here and press Ctrl+1. In either case, we will end up with the Format Cells dialog box. We want to go to the Border tab and choose this diagonal right here. Now it's going to look a little strange at first. We don't necessarily need to have black borders on the others, but we could use that, and maybe your thinner line would make sense here. Choose the thin line here and then come back and click these. We're not quite there. The next thing we need to do is to put some spaces in front of reporting date and a little bit of guesswork here. I'm simply clicking in the formula bar, pressing some spaces. And as I do this, I say, okay, that looks pretty good about there. Press Enter. And maybe that's not quite good enough. So making the column wider, come back again, possibly you can double click in the cell and do this as well. So you might have to experiment with a little bit. And it's not a major feature, and yet it's one of those things that clarifies the data. Possibly changing the font color here might be helpful as well, but it just shows how we can provide labels within the same cell for both column and row data. It's called elbow formatting. This worksheet has about 400 rows of data. Maybe you're ready to print this. Of course, it's always a good idea to go to Print Preview, and Control F2 is very helpful. It instantly gives us the print preview. It might occur to you as you look at this that this could be more readable, and since some of the people who are viewing this might want to make some annotations, this would be better if we could print this double-spaced. When you enter print preview, by the way, you can immediately return to the worksheet environment with the escape key. Now, one approach could be, and if you had only a small amount of data, this would make sense, you could click row 2, and then holding down the control key, click row 3, row 4, row 5. We've got about 500 rows. But if you did have a small number of rows, you could then right-click and insert, and you would get empty rows here and there. And then just showing how the print preview might look, control F2, we could take a look at that. You see just the beginning of it there? That's the look that we're after. But obviously that's not appropriate or feasible here in a very sensible way. So I'm going to press Control Z, make a change. A really fast way to do this, and not a standard built-in feature, is simply to select the entire worksheet and take any row boundary between the row numbers and simply drag this to be about twice as tall. Sure looks like double space to me. You could make it triple if you want to do. In other words, nobody's stopping you from dragging this to a specific height. Let's do another quick print preview here with Control F2. Sure looks like double spaced. We're ready to print it. We go ahead and print, and that's it. After doing that, we'll press Escape, come back here. We could probably just do an undo because you can't unprint. It's not going to undo that. We're back to here. We're all set. So double spacing is real fast and easy for printing purposes. It wasn't really double spaced. We just made the rows taller.